1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5.
Members, ready? Okay. All right. Okay. We're going to have singers before the pledge, so just as an FYI. I'd like to call to order the February 17th, 2020 regular board meeting of the State College Area School District Board of Directors. If you could all rise this evening, we have the honor of having the State College Area High School Chamber Singers here to do the national anthem in honor of President's Day. The flag for the face, yeah, we should face the flag for the anthem, I think.
Keep coming. Oh, say, can you see by the dawn's early light what so proudly we hailed at the twilight's last gleaming, whose broad stripes and bright stars through the perilous fight o'er the ramparts we watched were so gallantly streaming, and the rocket's red glare, the bombs bursting, gave proof through the night that our flag was still there. Oh, say does that star-spangled banner yet wave o'er the land of the free and the home of the brave?
I pledge allegiance to
To the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you so much for being here. Yeah, it's fantastic. Okay. So, board members, with an agenda before you, are there any changes to the agenda? The one item I'm going to note is under information discussion. The last item, item F, I think we will do first as the first item under information discussion. Okay. Anything else from board members? All right. I'd like to welcome everyone who's here this evening, as well as those of you who are viewing from home. I'd like to announce that the board held an executive session February 3rd regarding personnel, legal matters, property, and contract negotiations, and prior to this meeting, an executive session regarding contract negotiations. With that, then, we'll move on to communications. Dr. O'Donnell?
Thank you. I'd like to welcome the music faculty, as well as appreciate, thank you, Mr. Clayton and the high school chamber choir for taking time to perform a special President's Day rendition of the national anthem and add a patriotic flourish to tonight's meeting. Tonight, we're pleased to have with us a trio of distinguished State High students, Claire Jin, Tori Sodende, and Jessica Zhang. Welcome to come on up. I'll share a little overview while you're getting set up, girls. The team was one of 5 national finalists out of 789 submissions in the Genes in Space competition to have a DNA-focused science experiment placed in the International Space Station. They weren't selected, but they did have their results published in the Journal of Emerging Investigators. We've invited Claire, Tori, and Jessica to share some of the details about their project with our board, so I'll hand it over to them at this time. So girls, welcome, and thank you so much for coming over to share a little bit about what your experiment involved.
Thank you. Good evening, board.
Thanks for being here.
Good evening, board members. I'm Jessica,
I'm Claire.
And I'm Tori.
and we're very excited to talk about our Genes in Space experiment. Genes in Space is a national competition founded by Mini PCR and Boeing in 2015, and it challenges students from 7th to 12th grade to investigate a space biology problem that can be performed on the International Space Station. In May, there are 5 finalists and several other honorable mentions that are selected from the wide amount of applicants that they get. And those 5 finalists then get a mentor from either Harvard or MIT, and that person can help them refine their experiment and be ready to perform or to present their experiment to a panel of judges at the International Space Station Research and Development Conference over the summer. And the winning experiment gets to go to the International Space Station.
Okay, so when people spend time in space, they lose bone density, they lose some of their bone mass, and they never fully recover even after they return to Earth. So years later, they still are at higher risk of fractures and osteoporosis. And so in order to have future long-distance space travel, deep space missions, this is a problem that really needs to be solved. So the experiment we proposed aims to discover the molecular mechanisms behind bone density loss in space, since scientists don't really understand what exactly is causing this. Like, is it the bone-forming cells or the bone-absorbing cells that are behaving differently? Or is it for the cells that are behaving differently, what exactly is going on with them? Like, we don't know this. So that's why we proposed looking at bone tissue, both on Earth and on the International Space Station, to see the differences between bone cells on Earth and in space. So the part of our experiment that allows us to see what exactly is going on with these cells is the use of single-cell analysis. So as its name suggests, it looks at each individual cell's expression level or use of specific genes. And this is in contrast to bulk cell analysis, which just tells us the average gene expression level for an entire tissue. So these 2 methods can be compared to like a fruit salad and a fruit smoothie. So the fruit salad, single cell analysis, lets you look at the proportion of each type of fruit that's in this mixture. So you can see each type of fruit and how much of it is in there. Whereas the smoothie only lets you see like the overall ending color. So similarly, single cell analysis lets us see the whether it's the proportion of cells that are expressing a specific gene that's changing, or if it's the actual expression level that's changing. And additionally, like bones are made of many different cell types. So by using single cell analysis, we're able to see if it's a specific cell type that is changing and having issues. And so this understanding is what would let scientists be able to develop measures to prevent or treat bone density loss in space.
So I'll just tell you a little about our experience with Genes in Space. In the winter of last year, my biology teacher let us know about this competition, and Claire, Jessica, and I thought that it would be a really interesting opportunity. So we submitted a proposal to Genes in Space in April, and that May we were notified that our proposal was one of the 5 chosen out of the 789 applicants nationwide to move on and be finalists. So from there, we were assigned a mentor, Kiana Mohajeri, who's shown on the slide, and she helped us a lot in getting our proposal more fine-tuned and ready to present. And so at the end of July, this past summer, we flew down to Atlanta for NASA's International Space Station Research and Development Conference. And there we were able to present our proposal, and additionally, we got a lot of opportunities to meet some very interesting people and the pioneers of space exploration research. One of those people was Dr. Serena Anand-Chancellor, who is a NASA astronaut and doctor, and she gave a seminar at the conference, and we were able to have her listen to our proposal and got to meet her. So throughout this whole experience, we were really thankful to get the chance to learn so much. And although we did not win this final round, we were still able to publish our proposal this November in the Journal of Emerging Investigators, which is a science journal that publishes work of younger scientists, like middle school and high school scientists. And overall, this experience was just a wonderful opportunity for us, and we learned a lot. We were able to make a lot of meaningful connections and meet with mentors that taught us a lot and other high school students interested in the same area of studies. And I think we're all just really thankful that we got this chance.
So thank you so much. Do you guys have any questions?
I'm so impressed. So glad you came to present to us this evening.
Thank you.
And it blows me away sometimes to see how much, well, for one thing, science has advanced, but that our school district and our faculty and our students are really ready to take it to the higher levels of achievement and performance the way that you seem to have. I just read about an astronaut from the space station who just finished like 345 days in space or whatever, and considering some of the consequences you were describing earlier in terms of the meaning of the possible experience of bone loss that person might experience, I think your research interest and your study would really add a lot of value to our understanding of what's going on. I do have one question. How do you isolate one cell mechanically? How does that work?
So there are like special like machines like the 10X machine, and what it does is it, like when it sends the cells through, it like puts them each into like a droplet,
Okay.
like an oil droplet with like a bead inside, and that bead has like specific like identifiers, and those identifiers are like RNA or like DNA, and they attach to the sequences within the cell, so that afterwards when you break the beads and like have all the like the RNA out, you can see which cell did this come from by the identifier, because you know that one identifier was in one bead with one cell.
Got it. Thank you very much.
I have a question. Did you find any information about how biological sex might play a role in this? Because we know that women are more likely to get osteoporosis in their older age, and so if we have bone density loss happening for women in space, is the problem compounded for them over time?
Well, we're not sure if there's research on that, but one thing we were considering is that if we were researching, if we were able to research this problem of bone density loss in space, that would possibly give researchers areas to target to start preventing that bone density loss, and hopefully something from that could be applied to problems with osteoporosis on Earth, but we're not sure if there's a difference in space with men and women.
Thank you.
So that was going to be my comment and plug, is that this is really great and exciting, and it's really important for people to understand that this is not just about astronauts,
Yeah.
because whatever you learn about bone resorption and when we get down to the genetic level, it gives us tools to solve all kinds of problems for all kinds of situations and people. So this is like basic bench research. It's really key and fundamental to everything we do in medicine. So yeah, that's great. I'm really proud of you guys. It's amazing.
Thank you.
Curious to know what you guys want to do after high school.
Something science related, but I'm really not sure yet.
Good.
I really like genetics or like genomics. But I also really like coding. So maybe like something in the future with like data science and like genomics.
I want to go into medicine and specifically pediatrics.
Good.
Well, the experience of putting together a research design at this level is going to be a valuable experience going forward, because once you've learned a lot of what goes into putting a good, solid research design together, that's something you'll be able to carry forward into future work. So, not to mention the great contacts that you've made through the project.
I had a quick question. Who was your biology teacher?
My biology teacher was Mr. Like, and we were also in contact with Mrs. Rosensteel is our advanced biology electives teacher, and she's the mini PCR machine that we won through this competition went to her, and so she's going to be able to incorporate that into some of her classes now.
That was the answer to my next question. So thanks. That's
thank
great.
you.
It was about $3,000, $4,000 device. So that's terrific.
That's great. Any other questions? Yeah.
I also just wanted to mention that part of these types of things is doing a good presentation for people like us, and this was a beautiful presentation.
Thank you.
I love the fruit salad analogy.
Yeah.
Any other questions? Yeah. Well, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you.
Congratulations. And for representing our district so well. Okay. Other communication items? Okay. Board members, any communication items?
So we do have a talk with the board
Mm-hmm.
coming up on the 19th, right?
Wednesday.
This is Wednesday
Wednesday.
at the Schlow Library. So,
I think we have
welcome.
coffee
Do we have a
provided.
slide
and-
for that?
Not sure if we do.
Okay.
We're at 11?
Yeah, so it's Wednesday at
11:30.
11:30.
11:30 at the Schlow
Schlow
Library
Library.
meeting room. And are we going to have coffee?
No connection.
I believe there will be coffee.
Okay, we'll provide coffee.
Peach trees.
Yep, thank you.
All right, all are welcome.
Yes.
Anything, ask me anything.
Anything and then,
Yeah.
yep. Okay, any other communication items? Okay, then is there a legislative update?
Yes, we had a call on Thursday. One of the guests on the call was Representative Sonny, and he's the House Education Chair. And he talked about the cyber charter bill, which is really his baby. He's trying to move it forward, and he's working on changes that will make it more palatable to people who oppose the bill. An added piece to this bill is that when a cyber charter identifies a student with special needs, the cyber charter would have to then contact the IU, who would then perform its own assessment of that student, and then the IU would bill the districts for that assessment. He's also looking for better means of communication between the state and districts. He's looking into software, so that was his portion. And then there was kind of a review of the governor's budget. So currently, the budget establishes these things. The basic education subsidy is set at $100 million, but it was noted that $98 million of that goes straight out the door for pensions, and so the plan is to request $160 million, which is what it was last year. The governor is proposing $25 million for special ed. PSBA is going to be pushing for $50 million, like last year. There's 10 mil. The CTC's got 10 million last year. Right now, nothing is proposed, but there's hope that 10 million will come through again. Transportation is being level funded, which is sort of problematic because it's behind $120 million in payments to districts. So that's a significant issue. There was discussion about the school safety grant policy. They are hoping for $60 million. As you know, $25 million of that gets distributed at a flat rate distribution. But the second half of that last year was awarded through competitive grants. So there was a conversation following that presentation of information that suggested that we move this funding to a non-competitive formula that would disseminate the dollars in ways that don't make districts compete with one another and really go to higher need districts. Universal full-day kindergarten was proposed in the budget. This is a problem in terms of, because it's an unfunded mandate, and they're anticipating that it would be $1 million price tag for schools who are not currently doing this. And then lastly, I'll just point out that the annual Advocacy Day, I'm sorry.
That's not me.
No, it was me. Annual Advocacy Day is March 23rd, and they're hoping for 250 members to join, and you can register by going to mypsba.org. So that's March 23rd. So that's it.
Thank you.
Sure.
Any questions on the update? I think a number of us, I think, have registered to attend Advocacy Day.
Great.
All right. So the next item then is the Center Region Council of Government Liaison Report. Gretchen?
And I will actually defer this to later in the meeting because the two updates are covered in agenda items.
Okay, great. Sounds good. Then at this time on the agenda, we have time for public comment. Each individual is limited to comments of up to 3 minutes as time permits for items on the agenda or related to board business. If anyone would like to make a public comment, you can come up to the lectern up here where the microphone is. Yes, yeah. And Mr. Reutzel, if you could just state your name and where you reside within the district, just, Borough Township.
Good evening. My name is Ted Reutzel. I live at 702 Edgewood Circle, adjacent to the high school. I'm a 1987 graduate of State College High School. I have 3 daughters in the district. I want to say I'm always very impressed at how much time and energy you all devote to trying to improve the school district, and I really do appreciate that. And I think it's evidenced by the singers gave me chills, and these young ladies, they must have stepped out. It's really, these scientists are really impressive. But there are times when there are negative effects as well. And the lights at the South Track have had a pretty profound negative impact on a lot of the neighbors of the school. I will say I appreciate that the district officials have met with the public a couple of times on this issue. And have received some input, but it seems that the agenda, the document that's attached to this agenda item, doesn't fully convey some of the discussion. And I just wanted to make sure that you were aware when you're voting on this item. A couple of things, and I don't know if you've looked at the document, but there's I believe a pretty clear need for additional evergreen trees on the northwest side of the track. There may be benefit in having additional coverage on the northeast side for the folks that live on Sparks Avenue. Their trees and my trees currently are deciduous trees, so in the fall and spring when the lights are on, there's not a lot of protection from the light pollution. Also, I believe there had been an agreement to increase plantings to allow some staggering. The plantings are currently laid out so that they will be appropriately spaced when they're full grown. But until they're full grown, there's going to be big gaps between them. And there was a lot of input from some of the neighborhood, actually, and one had suggested that if the evergreens are staggered 3 deep instead of 2 deep, it provides a solid barrier if everything lives, and better coverage if a few of the trees die, which is certainly to happen. And the folks that had made that comment actually were folks on Sparks Avenue that had trees that had planted when the Welsh Pool lights were put in. So sort of firsthand experience going on there. There was a discussion of planting trees at a reasonable height, and this I don't think was addressed in the document. And I assume that they would be planted at some kind of reasonable height, 10 feet or so. Seems appropriate to me. I don't really know the cost of that. And there was a point made that we need to get some budget allocated, but I'm worried that the budget that's currently allocated is not adequate to address all the additional points that were discussed during the meeting. And so I hope you take that under consideration. I don't really understand the ins and outs of how budgets are placed and formed, but I hope that's taken under consideration. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Yeah, and we
Perfect
will,
time.
sorry,
It's
that's
on
the
your-
timer. Yeah. And there will be, because that's under information discussion this evening, it would not be voted on this evening. However, wait, I'm sorry. It is under action this evening, but the action this evening is not a vote on the actual exact layout. It's a vote on moving forward with the project, so.
I was just hoping the budget allocation is.
Okay, thank you. So that should be relatively early in the agenda coming up then. Is anyone else here who would like to make a public comment? Okay. All right.
Okay, then seeing none, we'll move on to routine approvals. If we could have a motion to approve the routine approval listing as presented on the agenda.
So moved. Second.
Okay, that's been moved and seconded. Any questions or discussion on routine approvals? Okay, we'll have a roll call then.
Mr. Hutchinson.
Yes.
Mr. Leos.
Yes.
Ms. Zidney.
Yes.
Dr. Vader.
Yes.
Ms. Bedell.
Yes.
Ms. Brandt.
Yes.
Ms. Concepcion.
Yes.
Dr. Duffy.
Yes.
Mr. Fozard.
Yes.
Okay, that item has passed. Item A, under action items, is a motion to approve the high school project change orders as presented on the agenda item.
So moved.
Second?
Okay, that's been moved and seconded. Any questions or discussion? Okay, Laurel? Yeah.
Thank you for the memo and for the work on trying to find a way to fix this in another way. I just wanted to double check that from what was explained, this was not an ADA required ramp, but it's being sort of held to the standards as if it were an ADA.
No, it's not. It's nowhere near the standards of an ADA ramp. An ADA ramp would be in the 5% range. Excuse me for 1 second while I get myself organized here.
Mostly I was trying to make
Yes.
sure that if it's not needed for ADA,
Right,
but it was needed for, or desired for another purpose, that there is a way around
right.
to
So-
bring those carts in other than going up and down steps, which seemed
Right.
to me much more hazardous than a higher than needed slope.
Right, so
Desired slope.
as a service ramp or a convenience ramp, the maximum percentage is 12.5%. Due to the existing conditions and space allocations, when the ramp actually got laid out, the final slope was around 14%, which exceeds what's considered a safe slope really for any ramp by code. In reviewing the ways that you could possibly extend the ramp to get to that 12.5% would be far more expensive than the actually removing the ramp and replacing with stairs. There are between the loading dock and both kitchens and the dining room and all parts of the building are accessible by ramp in one way or another. So it's less convenient and less direct, but there are alternate routes. So in working through the potential solutions here, the space is still as usable. We didn't reduce the usability of the space, and we were able to save money, incur less of a cost by doing the stairs as opposed to the ramp itself. And this was first discovered in March of 2018. We met with code regularly over the course of a year. We do have regular monthly code meetings trying to assess the situation and come to some compromise. And at the end of the process, this was the most favorable compromise.
I still think it's unfortunate. And, I was just at a school last weekend, Bethel Park, that has a much steeper slope, and I didn't notice any problems there. I realize it's another county and all, but I'm disappointed that they weren't able to grant a waiver for something that certainly sounds like a better use of the space in terms of functionality. So it's unfortunate.
Any other questions? Okay, then we will have a roll call vote.
Mr. Leos.
Yes.
Ms. Zidney.
Yes.
Dr. Vader.
Yes.
Ms. Bedell.
Yes.
Ms. Brandt.
Yes.
Ms. Concepcion.
Yes.
Dr. Duffy.
Yes.
Mr. Fozard.
Yes.
Mr. Hutchinson.
Yes.
Okay, that item has passed. Item B is a motion to approve permission to bid the South Track landscaping proposal as presented on the agenda. So we'll have,
So moved.
Second.
okay, that's been moved and seconded, so we'll have a little review here of what's comprised in that proposal.
Sure. So as you folks know, but for the benefit of others in attendance, this action this evening is not approval of a final plans by any means. It's simply an action we request early in the process regarding permission to bid. prior to the district actually expending a large degree of funds in terms of developing plans and advertising and so on and so forth. So this is the first step in the process. And we've met with neighbors on several occasions. We've worked with the borough arborist, our engineer, and our civil engineer and landscape architect have developed a draft plan. There have been some modifications to the draft plan, and we're showing it on the screen here. What we're looking for at this point is permission to bid that would now allow us to move forward with the actual plans and then bring you back a bid at some later date. It was mentioned earlier about the size of the trees. We fully intend, when we do develop these plans, to have the trees at a substantial size. It's been priced accordingly to have trees in 10 feet in excess, depending on the species, but certainly large, mature landscape stock that would be commercially available for purchase. But again, we've priced this to be larger landscape stock, and to meet that desire. It's never possible to plant a mature, or highly unlikely to plant a mature stand of trees. But we're going to try to get this to be spaced appropriately to give good cover, stagger where we can, and give substantial stock. And again, understanding that trees grow for many years and it will mature. Draw a line of trying to get the best possible stock, and then also plant it in a way that in such a way that we get some immediate impact but more long-term impact as well. Be happy to answer any questions or discuss further as needed.
Scott?
Just one point, I believe, for clarification. The gentleman made a question or comment about a budget item for $25,000, and I just want to point out, per the memo, we just have an estimate for what this project could be, not necessarily a budget per se. So, Ed has provided an estimate, for us, just from the standpoint of the order of magnitude, but we won't know how much the actual cost is, therefore what a budget would be until the actual bids come back. So.
Does fall into your annual.
Yeah, we've inserted this in our 5-year this coming summer, or this cycle of our 5-year capital plan, so we have it aligned funding this project.
Ed, could you speak to the balance of deciduous versus evergreen trees and how that was
So
arrived
the
at?
original plan was much more. So we're trying to strike a balance. You don't want to plant a monoculture of trees because that invites any sort of pest or disease infestation to wipe out the whole stand or have at least a competitive balance against a whole stand of trees. So original plans had a mix of deciduous and evergreen trees. Based on our meetings and discussions and considering the timing and use of the field, we've shaded it more towards evergreen trees and less towards deciduous trees. There should be a second page, let's see, that talks about the trees that we're showing now, which are strongly geared towards the evergreen variety of trees. The larger trees in this plan, it would be the Norway spruce and the white pine. We've looked for not only large growing evergreen trees, but also native plantings, which is a little bit of a challenge to find. You'd like to have a little bit more variety in the large trees, but in terms of finding a native evergreen that doesn't shed needles or lose growth over time, these trees grow on the faster side and maintain a full dense cover throughout the year and as they age. The hollies, bayberry, winterberry, and viburnum would be the lower growth that would fill in bigger density at the in the lower statuary of the canopy.
And Ed, because the white pine, well, both of the evergreens can get quite large. I know there's been some comments about potentially staggering these 3 deep or a more dense layout in order to have impact sooner. However, when we're dealing with this kind of size of evergreen, overcrowding over time is likely to inhibit growth. Wouldn't that be
Yeah, we're trying to.
likely a concern at least? And I know, like, and I just wanted to mention one other thing for those who don't know. The viburnum, the bayberry, and those are all evergreen and will keep their leaves. And I think some of the winterberry hollies do as well. So even though they're shrubs, they're not deciduous. They will maintain leafage and foliage in the winter.
And so we're trying to strike a balance here, between making, some immediate impact as well as creating something that will work for years to come. One of the things that we talked about and we intend to do is within our bid specifications, we'll publish the planned layout, but we'll leave an instruction to whoever the low bidder happens to be that the actual setting of the trees will be field set by the owner, meaning, when the trees come out to the site, they won't be working off a survey. We'll work with the actual tree and saying, plant it here, and work through, with the actual trees to set up something that makes sense visually as it's going in the ground. And then we've also talked about allocating, a per tree allowance, a unit pricing for per tree allowance, so that, if we get to a certain setting or a certain stagger and we're 2 trees short, we have a per price to add a couple trees by change order, just so that we can make this. We've been through a lot of projects together and know that sometimes looks great on a plan and you get out in the field and something, you go, wow. So we're going to try to set this up for success so that as it's going and being established, we can make the best use of our stock in the layout.
Is that something that the borough arborist would be able to continue working with once
I'm
you get
sure
the trees?
I'm sure Mr. Sam would help with that as well.
Other questions? Great. Laurel?
That was helpful, thank you, because it answered a couple of my questions. But one thing I'm wondering, well, there were 2 concerns I had. One is that looking at it, it actually seemed like there was a bit of a gap between, there's one planting at the far end or the shorter end of the field, and then there are others on the long side, and there seemed to be a gap between them.
Yeah.
And I was wondering about that, because if the point is to sort of shield those houses, it seems like whatever's on the one on the other side of that gap is
Right.
less shielded.
Right. There's a couple things at play here. There is a gap here, and again, where this ends here, when we start doing our field work and laying out, I'm not ruling out that something could work its way a little bit around the corner. What we're trying to balance here is the site is at one elevation as you go around the track, but each of these lines indicate they're contour lines, and the site starts to fall away from the track pretty drastically here. Houses down here at a much lower elevation than the track is up here. And we additionally have a large service gate on this side of the track that we're trying to keep access to so that we don't grow ourselves into an area where we could future may need to bring large vehicle access in. So we're trying to balance some things. Additionally, we don't want to plant trees too far down the hill, as that would create a situation where a 10-foot tree, 10 foot down the hill, 5 foot down the hill is only a 5-foot tree. So if you follow me, we're trying to keep up on the hill and not trail down the hill. So there is an opening here. There's a pretty full growth in this area, and we believe we've done these trees here are designed for these houses, and once you get down into this area, you really can't see the property over here, but we're trying to strike this balance of managing the site, managing access, managing the current conditions, and trying to get the, something that's going to be helpful for, as many situations as we can. So I'm not ruling out we couldn't get another tree or two over this way, but we don't want to close this gap here and landlock the site.
Because there's a gate there.
Yeah, there's a large service gate right in this area.
And you may just have answered my other question with the comments on the topography and the height, because when I had looked at this originally and trying to understand why there were so many on that long side of the field, I know there's field on the other side of that, and I went back and looked at how the light spill was when we were looking at the lights in the first place, and it doesn't even really begin to extend into the field. And there's further plantings on the other side of the field, because there's a bike rack there, bike path, and there's plantings. So I wasn't even sure why there needs to be so much here.
We were really,
that.
throughout last year when we were talking about the lights and whether or not we can get them, we obviously the light spill issues, and we do have the company coming back very soon. They were out to evaluate it, and that was a follow-up on some conversations with our neighbors. The trees, really looking at the reflective glow that's coming off of there. So I think that's my understanding of how that was really going to hopefully impact the site. And we talked about the plantings last year. What you see here is much less than what was initially on the plantings. And the team added some to the right on there. There's some fitness equipment that is used, but also the arborist from the borough spoke about the homes that are off in that direction. The borough did some plantings along the bike path back, I think back when the path might have gone in. If I'm correct on that, Ed? I forget.
I think those are
said.
what I saw when I looked back, and that's why I was wondering why these really add that much. I mean, plantings are nice, but I was concerned wondering whether it would add that much, and also if when we have larger events there, having these trees will make it harder for people who do want to watch from that side to even see. They're on the other side of the fence, I
Yeah,
assume?
most people, I rarely ever see people standing on that side of the fence, but I guess for a track meet, you could go stand over there. But most people are on the hill or right along the fence.
Where the bleachers.
Yeah, there's a fence at the bottom.
That kind of
there.
drops off on that side as well.
Now, when there's the elementary track meet, there are people everywhere.
Yep. Yep. Okay. All right. So the next action for the board then will be when the completed plans come back with the bids.
Typically, for a project this size, we would finish the plans and bring back a completed bid. If you'd like another update prior to pricing with more advanced documents, I could certainly do that. I don't have it necessarily in the plan. I'm working at your pleasure here in terms of, for this one, you may want to see something more further advanced, and if that's the case, we can bring it back. Otherwise, we would take any feedback and we'd bring you back a completed, with bids procured. So that's your call, how you want to do this.
Timing-wise, Ed, what do you need for the planning window?
We're going to be trying to do this in the spring, so either way, we'll be moving pretty fast on this. I'd say, if you wanted to see this one more time, we'd be back, probably on March 17 with the final, and then hopefully with pricing sometime in April.
I think that could be helpful. Others?
What do you mean by that? Coming back one more time?
Right.
What would the planning window be then?
And we'd be looking at
Late April,
planning
May.
in April.
If that doesn't
Late
affect the
April,
timeline
yeah.
for completion.
Yeah, we can't, it's too early to plant right now, plus we have a giant mound of soil still here. So we got a little bit of work to do to get the site ready. So, we're going to need, 4 weeks anyway to get ready. So again, it's going to be quick, but we have some time to get, to work through this till we get to the planting, the time when we'd actually be able to plant.
Okay. questions or input?
Thank you.
I got a question, just, and I don't want to spend any more than a minute on this, but looking at the map and looking at the gradients that indicate the slope,
Mhm.
the lower left-hand corner, does that indicate that the homes behind it are on a hill?
So coming this way is going uphill, so there's a
Right.
very steep hill going this way. And then this is going downhill, so the track is elevated and goes down into a little bit of a gully here. We don't have I'm not sure if it tails back up here in the properties or not, but then this is continuing downhill this way.
I was just looking at the property that's,
I believe it's
Towards the
more
south.
straightforward. I think it just tails into a little gully here.
got it,
and
okay, so it flattened it out,
And then
basically.
comes,
All right, thank you.
works its way back up.
Thanks, Ed.
So, and this is a result with Matt Harlow involved with the borough arborist. Obviously, we did listen to some neighbors. We significantly increased what was initially developed on the side of the field, is almost doubled of what was initially drafted by that team of professionals. So my question is, what is the board desire here if you're not going to move on this, or?
Oh, I thought we were.
Okay, so
Yeah.
people are comfortable?
Okay.
Okay.
Yeah, we have to vote.
And does this, I imagine some sound abatement? Does this provide, is it significant?
I'm not an acoustician, but I do not believe trees are going to add a great deal of sound abatement.
All right. Is there any other board comments or questions? Is there any public comment then before voting? That's fine. Yeah, sure. You can come up if you'd like.
I appreciate all the discussion. Ted Reutzel again. Just a couple of points. I took some pictures actually tonight, because the lights were on tonight, from the area where the gap is, and you can pretty clearly see the lights. Those are deciduous trees, and they're there's pretty much no trees, no leaves there right now.
Okay.
So,
Good to know.
thank you. Oh, actually, one other just quick thing.
Sure.
I think, just to clarify, I wasn't implying that we would plant the trees right next to one another, but if you stagger them in an appropriate way, you can keep them further apart, but still block while they're growing. So, thank you.
Thank you. Okay. And then, yes?
Is that, when you talked about field siting, is that the type of thing that would happen at that point, if appropriate, given the topography?
Yeah, yes.
That Mr. Reutzel or whoever, the owner, I don't know if the owner is us or them, we're the owner, that we would be involved in actually helping
But we have
figure out
commit-
what goes best.
We
Okay.
committed letting the neighbors know
Okay.
when that would
When it's
happen.
Thank you.
Okay. All right. Then with that, we'll have a roll call vote.
Ms. Sidney?
Yes.
Dr. Bader?
Yes.
Ms. Vidal?
Yes.
Ms. Brandt?
Yes.
Ms. Concepcion?
Yes.
Dr. Duffy?
Yes.
Mr. Fozard?
Yes.
Mr. Hutchinson?
Yes.
Mr. Leos?
Yes.
Okay, that item has passed then. Thank you. Thank you for your comments as well. Item C is a motion to approve Crabtree Rohrbaugh Associates contract extension for the high school and elementary school projects.
So moved.
Second?
Okay, that's been moved and seconded. Any questions or discussion?
Yeah, one or two, just, well, first I want to acknowledge the hard work that Crabtree Rohrbaugh and the work that Massaro has done in terms of just the pure total effort that's gone into the development of our capital resources in the school district. They've done a great job. And we're at the tail end of that relationship. And this is like, in a way, this is like a change order. I'm looking at this as kind of a change order situation. And as often occurs with change orders, it's the technology of it stumps me to some extent. So I'm really curious, in terms of the invoices that have been contributed up to this point, that have been developed up to this point to represent the work that's been done, where are they in relation to $50,000? Would you say they're well above that, well below it? In other words, where are we in this range up to 75?
Make sure I'm thinking straight here. Jeff, you want to come up and you can punch me if I say something wrong? I believe, well, let's start with I'll talk about the high school. That's where I'm easy. And the elementary schools have some similarities down the road, but it's easier for me to talk about one project at a time, and I'll try to conglomerate in my mind. you know, I believe that the high school contract was around $7 million.
Sounds about right.
Yeah. So the high school contract was around $7 million. So 75,000 is a, you know, tiny sliver, yeah. So just thinking about why we're here, and we talked about this a little bit and had some time to also think more clearly about, we talked about this at committee. You know, it really is the duration of the project that's causing the need here.
The bad weather.
And yes, so, you know, we had a very long project. We had 2018 was a horrendously bad year that set all of our projects back, and caused us, while we did open the buildings on time, there were many incomplete items. And two things in play here in terms of when we signed a contract with Crabtree is there is a planned beginning and final closeout. And this extends beyond the planned final closeout, which by contract entitles Crabtree to additional services. Additionally, again, by contract that we've signed, there's a duration clause that when the contract extends past a given duration, which is contract far exceeded the given duration, there's an entitlement to additional services. And, you know, that's because of, you know, the repeated amount of service and detail and the amount of unanticipated meeting times and working through issues beyond what would be considered the reasonable close of the project. Jeff, I'll let you add anything you wanted to add on that.
And we struggled bringing this forward to the district. I think eventually it turned into a conversation. The contract, how it was set up, was actually at the end of construction, the agreed upon construction schedule. And we actually waited about 2-3 months past that, and we're sort of holding off submitting it. And finally, we got to mid-fall and just said, these meetings are being very extensive. A lot of it was, instead of closeout occurring during the summer, it was sort of happening repeatedly in the fall, and that's when we said we'd like to just start tracking those dollars and submit that to the district. We've also, at this point, the conversation I've had with Ed is really the hours have become minimal at this point. We're more administrative, working with Macero and some of the contractors for closeout. What I've stated is essentially all our architectural staff, including myself, we will not be submitting any more bills. The only minimal that will occur will be some administrative cost over the coming months. So that really should be about wrapping up at this point.
Any other
Thank you.
questions?
Thank you for clarifying that.
I'm good. Laura?
Yeah, I do appreciate the clarification, because I mean, to me, I understand that it was through the end of construction, but I also figure the construction isn't over till it's over. And then I was trying to think of, and I sent in a question of what the cost of the work was, because in looking at the contract and trying to understand the percentages, I was wondering how that is calculated. And we have, later on, we're going over the closeout orders, and there were numbers in there, and I was trying to figure out, of those numbers, what is the part that when we say, okay, it's 6% or 5.5, whatever the percentages are that's in the fees, what is the bottom line on which they are based? Because we've got both contracts, we've got soft costs, we've got contingencies, some of them overlap.
What do you, I'm not sure.
Not sure I understand
What are
The cost of, it's called the cost of,
percentages
the
are-
final
are
cost of the work is
against
the
Right, that should be.
Total construction or total project?
Total, it would be against total project, and then that switch, by the contract, switched to an hourly rate at that point to track that. If that answers your question.
Well, that was the thing, is trying, it
Asking
looked,
what goes into that total cost.
right.
Right.
Because it looked to me like already we've exceeded the percentage amount
Okay.
that was in the contract, and then trying to understand if we've already, because I could understand if we had been under or even right at that amount, but it looks like we're significantly over it. So I was wondering why we even needed the extension, even though I understand the months and the closing, but
Yeah, we have not exceeded the contract terms beyond what you're seeing here. Probably why you're not able, I mean, I could do a full accounting to show you how I get from point A to point B, but you've got the 5.5 and the 6%, 5.5% of new construction, 6% of renovation. Then there's allowable reimbursable expenses, which had a certain caveat to them, but those would be on top of, and they would come on a monthly basis. So, by contract, we've spent what we were contracted to. Now we're in a situation where you had mentioned construction's not over till it's over or something, but by contract, construction is over at a certain point, and we're past that point. So by contract, there's no envision in the contract that the services extend indefinitely or till projects are closed out. There is a fixed contractual time frame tied to the contract, and we're past that contractual time frame.
We're working in an incremental way on a fee-for-service basis.
Yes.
And all I was asking for is where are we on that line, if you will, between 0 and 75? Where are we now in terms of the billing? I don't expect an answer right now, but that's what I was asking.
Maybe halfway between 0 and the 75, in there somewhere, ish.
Scott?
So the way I look at this is, and I don't know whether this helps explain anything, but, per the memo and some of the language, from that and also from facilities, the contract was for services through substantial completion. And substantial completion is a generally accepted, identification of where you are in a contract. So if substantial completion took forever, then that contract would be forever, okay? But substantial completion occurred at a fairly specific point in time in August, whatever that was. And then there's the expectation per the contract that we should get through our punch list and our closeout within whatever it was, 60 or 90 days. And that, to me, is really where this, overage, quote unquote, has come, is it's taken longer to actually get from substantial completion to completion. And substantial completion is the only thing that is specifically identified within the contract. So it may be somewhat ambiguous, but it's very specific contract language relative to how the fees are structured. And, if we had been done in 60 days, this would be quote unquote 0. But since it's gone beyond 60 days, this is where, it's fair and it's per the contract terms to actually go into a time and materials, kind of thing. Little additional clarification relative to what Ed said on reimbursables. Just keep in mind that, everything else is at 5 1/4, 5 1/2, and 6, whatever that is, but those reimbursables are at 100%. So if they are substantial, which they could be with travel and lodging and everything else, then that obviously automatically pushes up the percentage when you're trying to calculate a total billing from the organization versus the fee percentages for the actual services versus reimbursable. So hope that helps.
Makes sense. Okay. Any other questions? Any public comment? Okay, we'll have a roll call vote then.
Dr. Bader?
Yes.
Ms. Bedell?
Yes.
Ms. Brandt?
Yes.
Ms. Epstein?
Yes.
Dr. Duffy?
Yes.
Mr. Fozard?
Yes.
Mr. Hutchinson?
Yes.
Mr. Leos?
Yes.
Ms. Sidney?
No.
All right, so that item has passed. Thank you.
Sure.
All right, so item D is a motion to approve the proposal with International Institute for Restorative Practices to provide on-site coaching regarding student handbook revisions as presented on the agenda.
So moved.
Second?
Okay, that's been moved and seconded. Any questions or discussion? Okay, we'll have a roll call vote then.
Ms. Bedell?
Yes.
Ms. Brandt?
Yes.
Ms. Concepcion?
Yes.
Dr. Duffy?
Yes.
Mr. Fozard?
Yes.
Mr. Hutchinson?
Yes.
Mr. Leos?
Yes.
Ms. Sidney?
Yes.
Dr. Bader?
Yes.
Okay, that item has passed. Item E is a motion to approve the board resolution on Pennsylvania student assessments as presented on the agenda.
So moved.
Second.
Okay, that's been moved and seconded. Any questions or discussion on this? Okay, we'll have a roll call vote then.
Just a little.
Ms. Brandt?
Yes.
Ms. Concepcion.
Yes.
Dr. Duffy.
Yes.
Mr. Fozard.
Yes.
Mr. Hutchinson.
Yes.
Mr. Leos.
Yes.
Ms. Sidney.
Yes.
Dr. Bader.
Yes.
Ms. Bedell.
Yes.
Okay, that item has passed. And then that should be sent to all of our, yes.
I just wanted to thank the people who worked on that. I know several of you worked really hard on that language. It's really important. I think it's good that we're weighing in, and so just thank you.
Mr. Bachring helped out.
Yeah.
Vern.
Vernon
We'll
had a-
we'll make sure we get it shared out both locally, state, and then also our follow-up meetings with legislators will and deliver that.
That's
And then
something to
on March
discuss at
23rd,
Advocacy Day.
right?
Yes.
I think it's March 23rd.
I think it is the 23rd.
Yeah.
Okay. Then with that, I think we'll move on to information discussion items and at least get through one or two of these before we take a break. So the first item under information discussion will be student learning, a research proposal by Matthew Peterson, who is here with us this evening, one of our teachers at Grays Woods Elementary. His project is the impact of gamification on student engagement and attitudes towards social studies. So thank you for being here this evening.
Thanks, Matt.
And Matt, thanks for being here tonight. Matt is a fifth grade teacher for us at Grays Woods, and you've already shared the title of his study. It is under full review. At Wilson College, it underwent full review with IRB, which does require us then to bring the research proposal to the board for review. And so with that, I'll turn it over to Mr. Peterson to give you a brief synopsis of the research, and then he'll be here to answer any questions that you might have.
Great, thank you. So the project I'm doing is to complete my master's degree in Master's of Educational Technology. So what I'm doing is creating a baseline with students through a survey, as well as time on task observations to see what student engagement is and the perceptions towards social studies as a curriculum is for the fifth grade students at Grays Woods. We'll then be doing a module of instruction in kind of non-gamified ways, and then we'll do a gamified module. After both modules, students will complete a post-module survey, and then that's the data that I'll be using along with time on task observations in both of those modules to analyze both engagement as well as their attitudes towards social studies and learning. So, but yeah, that's the short of it, I guess. But yeah, I can answer any other questions if there are any.
Sure. Questions? Yep. Scott?
The only question I have is, and I apologize if it's in here and I just didn't see it, how will you measure engagement?
So engagement is going to be part of the time on task observation. So it'll be a whole class observation. We'll have different adults in the room that are already accepted to kind of take on that role for me. Not every single lesson will have a time on task procedure, but I'm trying to get at least 3 per module. So we're going to compare those two data points as well as the, surveys that the students will complete. Has a kind of a self-grading section where they'll ask, how do you feel during that unit? Do you feel like you were engaged? So to try to get the student perception of things as well.
Yeah, because I think it will be interesting to see, with today's kids, how time on task could actually be shorter and have higher engagement. So I think that'll be an interesting, data point to see whether the qualitative aspect of I feel engaged versus the quantitative aspect of I was engaged for a period of time, whether they match up considering gamification.
Yeah, no, it'll be interesting to see. And this study doesn't have a formal hypothesis ahead of time.
Yep.
So it really is just to see kind of what happens in the fifth grade classroom in social studies.
Thanks. Interesting.
Thank you.
Lori?
I have 2 questions. One is, how long do you anticipate each module taking?
So we're in a kind of a unique situation at Grays Woods where we have a rotation for classes. So I teach all fifth grade classes in social studies. So our rotation is 7 classes per, homeroom. 5 of them are a 40-minute block. 2 of them are about a 50-minute block.
Okay.
So I'm going to try to do 1 cycle as 1 module.
Got it. And my other question is, this is primarily about
engagement and not necessarily about material retention or
Correct.
anything, right?
Right,
Okay.
yeah, there are no pre or post tests to kind of compare between. It was, I guess, a way I could have gone. I didn't really want to. I wanted to see what the student perception of things was.
Yeah.
As social studies is kind of nationally not the most popular of subjects, at least in the research that I've been doing. My fifth graders really are enjoying it this year, so I'm curious to see how that's going to kind of stack up to the research I already have.
Thank you.
Okay. Jim, any questions?
This looks great.
Thank you.
Amy?
No, I'm good.
The question I had was, how do you define gamification?
So yeah, gamification is the use of any game mechanics in a non-game setting. So I mean, everybody has experienced gamification in one way or another. Simple kind of peers versus teacher points on the board is in a way a very simple way of gamification. A lot of like athletic apps like Apple Watches and Fill the Circle. I mean, that's really a way to increase engagement and your activity in trying to complete something that really is just a show. So it's really just any way that game mechanics are being used. So I've done break-ins and breakouts where students are looking through material that I've kind of gathered and they're finding answers. It's using concepts that we've talked about in class to see if connections are continuing to be made. I've used like the Jenga board in my math class before, where we played a game of Jenga, but each block has a number on it that relates to a specific math problem that then they have to go back to their team and solve. So it can really look a lot of different ways.
Interesting. Thanks. Dan?
When I was first reading about your proposal, I read it as gamification. I thought you were talking about using gamma rays.
Yeah, no, not.
But I did a little bit further research, and this does connect with cooperative learning, an earlier literature, set of literature on something called teams games tournaments. I don't know if you're familiar with that, or if that's something you've looked into in terms of looking at the background for your study.
Yeah, there's a lot. I mean, there's a lot of talk with gamification because you can go kind of individual versus individual. It can be a class-wide kind of an RPG style game that we kind of do with our Westward Ho unit, where they make families and have supply lists. It's kind of like the old Oregon Trail game that we kind of play. We've just kind of brought it to life. So there's a lot of different ways you can think of it.
Do you have a question that I know this is not, as it is social science research, psychological research is not rocket science. I mean, it's a pretty messy enterprise. And you're engaging in something called action research, which is much more qualitative and not nearly as, quotes, empirical. But you have elements to this that suggest something, since you're going from class to class doing this, and sometimes using a traditional method, sometimes using the gamified method. I mean, you could naturally counterbalance that. So in some of the classrooms, you could start with a gamified version versus the traditional, and then the other one you go from traditional to. So you can kind of, in terms of the introduction of this intervention, you can balance it out in terms of the effect of which is first, in terms of being novel or new.
Absolutely, yeah. I haven't thought about that. I'll have to
ask your advisor to see if that might be worthwhile doing.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Thank you.
Gretchen, any questions? David?
No, you got mine.
Okay. Laurel?
Thank you for working on this. I think it's really exciting, and I'm glad to hear you pursuing the master's in that area, and it'd be interesting to see results that you come up with.
Thank you.
Isabel, any questions?
I don't think so. I am just curious. So it sounds like a portion of the data is collected by teachers and staff who are observing?
Yes.
So I'm curious. We have sort of discussed this a little bit in a high school setting, but I know that bias plays a big role in how we observe student engagement and even observe student participation. And
Absolutely.
I'm just curious if these teachers and staff members who are going to be conducting this data and sort of working this activity, have they been given sort of a rundown in bias, and have they had some work in analyzing how they might view specific students' engagement?
Yeah, it's yes. I would say a short answer. We have some of the adults that have kind of agreed to do it are ones that have done time on task observations before, so they're kind of aware of that. They're going to be giving a pretty strict idea of what does being engaged look like for each lesson. And so, but as you said, there are going to be times where a kid can be looking at a book and they might not actually be reading, but on the time on task, it says they're engaged. So that is one of the limitations that's going to be discussed in the study. Yep.
Interesting. Scott?
I'd like to recommend that we move this to action.
I'll second.
Okay, that's been moved and second to move it to action. All in favor of moving it to action?
Aye.
Aye.
Anyone opposed? Okay, would you like to make a motion to approve?
Yes, I'd like to make a motion that we accept the impact of gamification on student engagement and attitudes towards social studies as a research proposal.
I'll second that.
Okay, that's been moved and seconded. Questions or discussion on
Just
the?
wish you a lot of luck. I appreciate you bringing this forward. I mean, this kind of inquiry is really powerful and very important, and it fits in within the what I understand to be the action research model for exploring ideas that are classroom-based.
Thank you very much.
Okay, with that, is there any public comment on this item? Okay, then we'll have a roll call vote.
Dr. Duffy?
Yes.
Mr. Fozard?
Yes.
Mr. Hutchinson?
Yes.
Mr. Leos?
Yes.
Ms. Sidney?
Yes.
Dr. Bader?
Yes.
Ms. Bedell?
Yes.
Ms. Brandt?
Yes.
Ms. Concepcion?
Yes. Okay, that item has passed, and then I think we'll
Thanks,
take
Matt.
a 5-minute break
You
before
have
we
to
move
share
on.
your results.
Yes, bring your results back.
Thank you.
So,
Really need to have a
we'll adjourn for 5 minutes or so.
I so enjoy social hour, but I know people also would like to go home.
Okay, so the next. Go ahead and call the meeting back to order. The next item on the agenda, item A, under info discussion, is under facilities and grounds, and we'll be looking at the elementary playground equipment and calendar update.
Okay, so as you stated, we're going to talk about calendar, and part of the calendar is that we have planned for the March 2nd meeting, which is your next meeting, to both award equipment purchases and approve permission to bid construction, which is construction documents. We'll spend a great deal of time talking detail on the playground equipment process and purchase recommendation. I have to apologize, you don't have construction documents for your review at this point. You'll probably have those in the next several days. But what I can tell you is that you reviewed design development documents on December 16, and the construction documents from a plan perspective include the same equipment that you saw December 16, and the same layouts minus one small change. So I'm going to talk to you about the one small change you'll see on construction documents, but otherwise the documents you'll see for construction documents will look from a plan perspective the same as the ones you saw on December 16. So there's not a lot of change. What you will see on the construction documents is just all the specification and language updates that would typically be inserted in the final phase of document development. So the only change in layout is at Spring Creek. So hopefully these aren't shaded so well for a presentation, but again, this is a minor change. All the equipment is the same. This is what you saw on December 16 with a log scramble here, a log climber broke up here, and a tree climber here. To better fit the site, the tree climber remains but moves up to where the log scramble used to be. The log scramble moves down to where the tree climber used to be, and the climbing logs kind of coalesce from two smaller pieces into one big piece. Other than that, the plans are the same. Again, you'll see those very soon with the completed language and this one updated layout, but the equipment's all the same, and there will be no new graphics or any other information. So any questions or more information that you'll need between now and March 2nd to take an action on permission to bid construction?
No, thanks for the timeline, that's great.
Sure. Okay.
It would be nice to, just because when you say coalesce, presumably instead of being two different areas, it's one.
Yeah,
It
so
does change play value, so we'll be looking at what the reason was behind that.
this simply the footprints, to make the footprint work with the final survey and the final layouts. They just had to jockey. The tree climber had a very big footprint, and this thing was split to try to accommodate that. And it was in working through these layouts, they were able to make this move and actually fit a tree in this area and get a better layout and equipment flow as they were doing the final developments.
Thanks.
Okay. We had, in your memo, there's a discussion of the equipment purchase process, which I'm not going to reiterate, but what I will do is jump into our recommendations around equipment purchases. Again, we talked about these conceptually at Facilities and Grounds, based on discussions at Facilities and Grounds and work with Metcalf in the interim. We're prepared to share with you the beginning draft of a recommendation we'd like to make on March 2nd. So I'll share with you our logic and reason behind each piece of the recommendation. And then pending any input today, we'll be prepared to bring you a final recommendation on March 2nd. So this is related to the traditional pieces of playground equipment that we've specified. We've elected that the district would purchase these in advance and supply them to the contractor at the time of a bid award. First item is the tree climber. There's one each at the schools, totaling 3. Our basis of design was the compan tree climber. We had budgeted that item at $16,691. We received 4 bids for that. They're listed there: the Miracle, the Playworld, the Compan, and the Burke. There are quite a number of differences between the elements. As we reviewed the Miracle and the Playworld, what is not evident, at the time we talked about this last, it was very evident that there were different construction materials, but there were also different sizes and capacities of the equipment itself. The Compan unit is a full 17-foot tall and accommodates quite a number of children and play opportunities. The Miracle piece and the Playworld piece are much smaller than the Compan piece. Based on our review of those pieces, while Miracle and Playworld submit them as equal, we did not feel they were equals, based on size. So we're recommending, again, we're trying to, do this, based on a comprehensive design, and the way these programs are designed, we believe the Compan is the lowest cost item that fits our design intent. So we're prepared to recommend the Compan unit at $16,051, which would come in for a total of $48,155, which is almost $2,000 below our budget.
That one looked a lot safer in terms of the density of the webbing, as well.
There were additional questions. I'll move on to the next item.
Just checking to make sure I understand, because the original estimates that we saw for that piece was like 25.9, but was that with installation? This is without installation?
This is only purchased equipment, correct. The next item is the parkour piece. There's 2 total, one at Radio Park, one at Coral Street. We had budgeted this at 11.3 for a total of 22 between the 2 schools. This one, Compan was our basis of design. Compan was also our low bidder. Looking at the numbers and the basis of design, this one is a pretty easy recommendation to recommend we go with Compan for a total of $17,275, which is roughly $5,000 below our budgeted item.
And, I know Compan was the basis of design on this and many of the aspects, but I don't know whether you agree or not, but in a bidding process, anytime somebody comes in at 50% or at 200%, your eyebrows go up and you wonder, what possibly could have been missed. So I would assume that you guys have evaluated that, and especially since they're the basis of design, that there's nothing that's being missed here because they're half the price of everybody else.
Right. So yeah, I could go a little bit. Yeah. So correct that we've evaluated that. I think what happened in this case, which is the opposite of the last case, is that for whatever reason, and I can't get in the bidder's head, they specified much larger pieces of equipment than what we had specified for the space, which may be more play value, but we're bidding on a specific item, and they chose to come in with something that had more components in it. Okay, embankment slides. So we had put in a Compan embankment slide. We had some discussion about this at the committee level, in that the Compan slide was a stainless steel slide, and the Playworld slide was a stainless steel slide. The Burke slide was a plastic slide. And we talked a little bit about stainless steel versus plastic. And one piece that I had missed in reviewing this with Metcalf was there's an additional difference comparing the two slides in that the Burke slide was a single person slide, and the Compan stainless steel slide is much wider, which would allow two children to go down simultaneously. So there would be more play value in the Compan unit than the Burke unit. Additionally, they felt that we had some questions about heat gain on the stainless steel, and Metcalf did not feel that that was a safety concern in terms of that the slide may be hotter, but not hot to the point of being dangerous. And additionally, they felt that there was a static electricity issue with a plastic slide that doesn't exist with a stainless steel slide. And they had some additional comments, but based on my review with Metcalf, we're going to recommend the Compan unit, which is $1,000 more than the Burke. However, it's we don't feel the Burke meets our specified intent, and we're still close to $1,000 below our budget on that item. And I apologize, I didn't get that in the memo because I was still working on details and didn't go back and insert that two-person piece. Benches. So we had 2 benches at Radio Park, 2 benches at Spring Creek. Those were, I apologize for going back between per school budget. So this is $4,000 for 2 benches, not $4,000 a bench. So it's $2,000 per bench, 4 benches, total $8,000. So the per school price from Play World was $1,606, Burke $1,644, Thomas Steele $3,248. Now, the big difference here is that the specified Thomas Steele bench was a natural wooden bench similar to what we put in front of the high school. The Play World and Burke benches are plastic benches. However, what we were able to learn is that it's 100% recycled plastic, which, in terms of looks may not have the natural look of a wooden bench, however, creates an opportunity for recycled content and an appropriate use of recycled materials. So we felt the sustainability aspect could allow us to recommend this plastic bench at a substantial savings. You're looking at, what would be if you look at the low bid, $6,400, you're probably about half the price. So it is substantially different material, but we feel the recycled content, and the need to be able to use recycled materials could allow us to make this as a sustainable recommendation at $3,212, which is, over $4,000 below our budget. The cone spinner, we have specified a Play World cone spinner. Play World's bid was $11,000 for the spinner, the direct model, the spinner that they would supply. We had a lower bid for Miracle at $8,355. I apologize. This is the one item we have not been able to finish our evaluation on. I'm feeling like it might be Miracle. However, it's kind of hard to, sometimes you get into these situations where you're looking for, what's the difference here? And I'm still not 100% sure that we evaluate every single piece to make sure it's equivalent. So when we get to the end here, we'll talk about that as scenario A or B. Pending. If the Miracle is judged to be equivalent, we would certainly recommend the Miracle, and then if not, we'd recommend the Play World. So there's going to be a $2,000 to $3,000 swing based on whether we go with the Miracle in our total recommendation package. swings. As you know, we've installed swings at Radio Park and Spring Creek. We specified similar, the same manufacturer, and the configurations are slightly different depending on whether you're talking about individual swings, group swings, or the ADA swings. But in general, the same swings we did at the previous two schools. We've specified at Coral Street. Those were budgeted at $17,405. We had both all three, Miracle, Burke, and Playworld, substitute traditional metal swings of one form or another at less of a price. And Compan bid was $15,183, which was over $2,000 below our budget. In talking through at the committee level, after leaving the committee, we felt like we would bring forward a recommendation to go with the specified Compan swings.
So sorry, in the committee side, this is where I was dropping off. But what, I'm not sure whether I heard you correctly. On Miracle Burke and Playworld, those are all, they're not the same material as
Right.
the Compan? Is that
They
correct?
would be like a typical metal swing you would see on the playgrounds out we have now.
And the Compan is wood-based?
It's the wood-based, yeah. Mhm.
So my suggestion, from the standpoint of documentation, et cetera, would be to maybe expand the recommendation to
Mhm.
include that.
Sure.
Because the recommendation, again, this is where I was dropping off. But it makes, the recommendation makes it sound like it's more aesthetics than personal preference, and it's really a composition question, that the composition of the equipment doesn't
Gotcha.
match what's there. It's not just that we want it to look the same, which I think is substantially different.
Yeah. Doesn't match the basis of design.
Correct, yeah, and actually, it's more, maybe it's more that it doesn't match the basis of design than it doesn't match what is currently there. Yeah, that kind of thing.
Got it.
And then, not to jump ahead, but I'm assuming that the same is true
Correct.
on Spring Creek, so I'd make the same comment there in advance. Thanks.
Understood. Then, since you jumped ahead, Scott, we'll jump ahead. Spring Creek would say ditto for what we just said. So, summing these up, working from right to left, we had budgeted total project for all three schools at $128,009. If we go with option one, which is the Miracle Spinner, we'd be at $109,357. If we go with option two, which is the Playworld Spinner, we'll total out at $112,200. I think either way, we're in a good position starting out this project. Either 26,000 or all right, 16,000. You're $16,000 to $19,000 under budget. So getting off to a good start, I think, either way. So we'll be prepared to bring one of those recommendations back to you on March 2nd for approval.
Ed, I do have a question on when you're evaluating that spinner, and maybe this applies to some of the other evaluations that, as Metcalf is helping with those evaluations. Is this something, like, has Megan or someone else there, like, actually been able to see and feel and touch these pieces of equipment live?
I'm asking for their help. I did not specifically ask them if they felt the miracle or not yet. My guess is that they haven't.
Yeah. And since this is a moving piece of equipment, like the way that one spinner moves might be different than the way another moves.
I could call the Miracle rep and ask if they've got one locally.
Oh, that's a good idea.
You know.
It might even be useful if there's video of these in use so that you could see how children interact with them.
And that could help with understanding the scale visually as well.
I just think, because this was the piece that was recommended for some additional kids with mobility issues to have access to.
Mhm.
So my biggest concern would be the
it?
stability and quality of the piece.
Mhm.
You know, that would be my biggest concern. I mean, for all children, naturally, of course, but if kids are potentially a little slower to get on and
Sure.
off because they have
That's-
mobility issues, we want to make sure it's really, yeah, good quality.
I'm being overly cautious for some of those same concerns.
I figured you were, but I thought I'd say it out loud.
Mhm.
So do you want to take questions now on
Sure.
all of these? Questions?
I was just going to say one other thing. So I think that makes a lot of sense, just to, because if there's something locally that Studio Ludo can just go look at, then that's really easy. But also there might be YouTube videos. I mean, I have yet to find something I haven't, well, my son hasn't found in a YouTube video. So that's just another easy way for Megan, for example, to be able to see the piece of equipment.
All right. Laurel?
Yeah, I appreciate the explanation because that was part of what I was looking at, is what the basis was. I appreciate the point about the composition versus the utility, just the looks of the swings. But there is a substantial price difference, and one of the concerns I had once I looked at the swings where they've been installed is in fact that those nice big thick meaty poles look like they can be climbed on, and yet we really can't have the kids climbing on them. So to me, that's counterproductive when you have to say to kids, no, don't, even though it looks like a nice big climbable pole. In fact, I think it came up in committee that, oh, you can climb those, but apparently they're not allowed to climb on them. I may be misinformed on that, so maybe that would be worth checking.
I don't know the answer to that. I don't know the answer to that. I would assume if that's happening, it may be a local decision. Maybe it's something that just people haven't thought about. The surfacing materials and would allow, from an ASTM standards testing, you have the proper clearances that somebody should be able to fall off of that as they would fall off any piece of, not the falling off a piece of equipment is a good thing. However, it would be, you'd have a similar risk of any other, falling off any other piece of equipment, so to speak. So I'm not sure how to answer that, other than I just don't know.
Well, it's probably something as a board we need to come back to, because I know in the original recommendations, part of what they, in doing the audit of the schools, part of what they point out was that there were different rules in different places, and that if we want the playgrounds to be used the way we want them to be used, that's something that needs to be reinforced. So if part of the goal and the design goal in using wood was that they be also climbing pieces, that's an important thing to know about, and then to make sure that they are being used to the fullest of the design that was incorporated into them. I was wondering about, I know that when we had done the project earlier with the swings, there was a separate cost for the actual tire swing. Are those pieces included in these now?
Yes.
In the price, so it
Yes.
includes the belts or the tire swings as appropriate?
That was one of the differences too, right? That the compound swings could accommodate the group swing slides within the bays, whereas a
Right,
couple of the
so-
other providers, it had to be a separate piece. Which
Correct.
also impacts the footprint, I would assume, as well, because they're gonna have to be spaced out. Yeah.
And just as a reminder, as we do go forward, because I am looking forward to seeing those documents, that was one of my questions, so thanks for answering that ahead of time. But I had also asked, and you alluded to in terms of the decision here, what the rated number of kids or play parts were for the different items that are in the plan, not just these, but the other ones as well, and the ADA accessibility information, that chart that was in the original audit that showed the actual number of ADA accessible points.
I think it was ADA accessibility is one of the components you're looking at when you're
Yeah, so-
determining whether
so-
this meets the basis of
And
design.
I don't, be a little bit of a stickler in language. Those are pieces of information we could bring back, they would not necessarily be part of construction documents. And be a stickler on when you're approving construction documents, that's the actual tool that goes out to the contractors. But I'm not saying we can't give that information, I'm just saying it's not technically part of construction documents. It would be information that could be generated or is available. It's just,
I think, and Metcalf was, and we have to be careful about saying ADA accessible because some pieces may be strictly ADA, but others had higher accessibility options is the way Metcalf and that was pretty clearly on the schematics. They marked which one, or at least they had talked about like which could be a transfer station and different things like that. So I'm not sure if those are, I can't recall, but I thought in the schematics there was maybe some, so I remember hearing about which ones they said but had some increased
I'll look back.
accessibility.
Yeah, and I realized it's a somewhat different thing. It was more just a reminder that I had asked, and they said they could do that, and I think maybe even already had it, and it was that specific form that was part of the audit that does, it's whatever formula is done, that as you said, there may be things that go beyond what's required in terms of that. But I at least thought that it was valuable for us to see, and just as a sort of double check that this is doing similar to what we have had, similar or better.
Scott?
Also, I mean, Laurel, you'd asked about capacity. I don't want anybody to reinvent the wheel on it, but wouldn't that be part of the design specs already? Is the capacity? I guess I'm making a statement, but I'm more asking the question because if that was already considered, then maybe the information either already exists or it's already somewhere.
Exactly. The information exists, it's just not part of what would be considered construction documents as a tool. Yes, but yeah, that it's information that could be provided, yes. I apologize for trying to be, I'm just trying to be careful with what I call construction documents versus information that's being provided.
Yeah, and I'm just trying to make sure that we've got the relevant information. Not that, I'm not trying to say that's not relevant, but just the relevant information for that decision, you know, as those data points. Okay.
Like, so for example, if option 1 versus option 2 on the cone spinner accommodate different numbers of children, you would want to know that.
Right. We would not recommend something that.
If it didn't.
That's part of the evaluation process, is we're not recommending anything that's diminishing the play value or the play opportunities or the capacity.
And that's kind of the element that I was thinking, was that I would have thought that that's already part of the design specs. It's, you know, the equipment specs. So if it doesn't meet X.
Right. So this is
if,
where
if we need 40 people on this and it only has 30, then it would not be it wouldn't have met the design specs.
Right.
So this will come back to us for an action item?
March 2, so we would have action on both the equipment purchases as well as final construction document approval.
And you expect the drafts will be ready for us by the end of the week or so, you'll get them to us?
You'll have them before the week's out.
Other questions? All right.
Will they go to the stakeholders at the schools as well?
We typically don't share construction documents with stakeholders.
They'll be on the website.
I mean, again, I'm trying to be, construction documents are blueprints.
Right.
We don't share blueprints
deep
with
to dig a
people.
hole.
Yeah, yeah.
Right. Yeah, it's not new.
And we've passed the point of, I mean, we've talked about when the end point was for input.
Well, it's not new information from the design development process.
So if people really want to know about the playgrounds, the place to go back is to the 12-16 presentation where all the graphics and those are the things that are going to make more sense to people than basically a roll of blueprints.
The master plan.
All right, thank you.
Thank
So
you.
item B under facilities and grounds is the elementary and high school project closeout update.
So in very ceremonial fashion, I brought the old team back together for one last visit. Come on up, guys.
They missed us.
You guys need some Kleenex or anything like that?
Good old D.
I brought tissue.
From Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania.
Okay.
I feel like we need a picture of this.
We should take a picture.
I was
seriously.
thinking that.
I'm not kidding.
Yeah, we should take a
I'm
picture.
totally
Hey,
taking
hold
a
on.
picture. Yep. Thank you.
One last time. Okay, got it? Got it. There we go. Good.
Thank you, Lynn.
Ending song.
Are they, sounds like they're happy.
Can't deny this in
Yeah.
the future. We have evidence.
It's bittersweet.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think it was 2012 that we actually started schematic design. So,
Can I tell a story real quick?
you want to tell a story?
So,
you
so
you
one,
can tell a story.
So one of my stories that I tell a lot of people is, I used to go to New York for about a week and a half to stay with my in-laws every year at Christmas time. And so in 2012, I got a phone call from John Padilla at our office, and John said, "You got to come back early. We got this big proposal." And that was State College High School for the initial proposal. So it's been a few years.
It's been a few years.
You didn't tell us if that made you happy or not. Your wife might be
I was a
watching.
little bit in hot water.
And we spent many Christmases together thereafter.
Yep. In the meantime, children have grown up.
Graduated.
A little bit of change.
Mhm.
Some people started having children.
So we're going to start out with just some graphical depictions of contract status. And we use this as a way to show degree of doneness, for lack of a better term, by how much money's been paid out versus how much money the district's still holding. So in theory, if there's $100,000, if you have a $10 million project and you look around and there's still $100,000 worth of work left, the district should be holding somewhere in the neighborhood of $100,000 worth of payments. So while this is not an exact science, this gives you an idea of where we are in the process as you look at some of these figures. And we can talk about any specifics related to the projects themselves. But for each of the elementary school projects, we had 5 contracts, general, kitchen, plumbing, mechanical, and electrical. At the Radio Park project, 3 of those projects are completely closed out. So on kitchen, plumbing, and mechanical, there's no work left. The contracts are paid out. What's left is warranty items, so if something breaks within the year, that's the only obligation any of those contractors have left to the school district. On the general contractor, there is we're still holding $69,000 out of a $13 million contract, and electrical, we're holding $30,000 out of a $2.8 million contract. Just looking at the total of all the contracts, we started at a little over $20 million. We had a change order contingency of $907,000, leaving an initial construction budget of $21,095,961. We're projecting, we're going to close this out around if everything, worst case scenario for the district, we would be at $21,144,393, which again would be, if we go out to that much and we think it'll be either that or less, we'd be at 0.23% over the original budget, which is, less than 1% over budget. When you're looking at, 21,095 versus 21,154. Statistically speaking, it's been a while since I took my college statistics, but that's probably the same. Probably no statistical difference between those numbers, or very little. It's basically bringing that project in on budget. We have, Jason, you would talk a little bit about what's left work-wise there?
Yeah, for Radio Park, if you look at the general, mainly site work. So there's a lot of lawn establishment they still need to do. There's some general pavement work that they need to fix or complete. Electrical, actually we did a lot of electrical work today with school being out, but there were nameplates, some lighting revisions, lighting controls, and just some general cleanup that they needed to do on the commissioning end. So very minimal, nothing that's really impacting operations at the school, just more contract closeout things they owe us that they need to complete.
Spring Creek, we have a kitchen contract, plumbing contracts closed out. You can see we're holding a little over 27,000 on the general, a little over 27,000 on the general, close to 20,000 on the mechanical, and 23,000 on the electrical. Looking at this project, which was 100% new construction, which makes it an outlier compared to the other three projects. We had a total construction budget going in of $17,072,000. We're going to bring this in around $16,608,000, which puts us 2.72% under the original budget. And you'll see when we go across all these projects, that was a significant difference because it was the only one that was all new construction. Less unknowns.
Yep.
Coral Street, we have a remaining balance with the general at 75,000, mechanical at 19,000, electrical at 20,000. Total construction budget of $15,279,000. We think will be around $15,003,000 something, and again, probably statistically very little difference there, but it's less than 0.29% over the original budget. What do we have left at Coral Street?
Yep. On the general end, we're working mainly with site work. We have some pavement revisions that the contractor needs to perform. We have some lawn and some basin work that still needs to occur in the spring, so most of that can't occur in the current weather. On the mechanical and electrical, most of that is related to commissioning, so it's just we do all these HVAC commissioning items, electrical commissioning items, and they just need to complete and check the box. So pretty minimal, even though there's still a substantial amount of money to bill against.
So take everything times 10 and we'll go look at the high school. SP 15, which seems like forever ago.
Yeah.
It's been done since 2015. That was summer project 2015.
Yeah.
The precursor project, which we added into our totals. We're holding over $500,000 on the general contractor, $250,000 on the site contractor, $45,000 on kitchen, $75,000 on plumbing, $10,000 on mechanical, and a little over $500,000 on electrical. For those projects, we were at $125,487 total construction. We think we're going to bring this in around $124,772, which is about 0.5% under the original budget. John or Tim? John, probably, you want to talk a little bit about what's key things are left there?
Yeah, so at this point, most of the work remaining is punch list items and some of the late change orders, which were flushed out sort of as users were in the space. So a lot of, we have a couple of heating issues which are getting solved via change order. Those are the type of things we're working on daily. And then some outstanding change orders, which we've been going back and forth on for months now. So trying to get those last few items wrapped up. General holds most of the punch list items left, but they've been working after hours and then in off times like today where there was no school to wrap up those items. So,
but on punch list we had like 8,000 items, which is down to a scratch on a wall or a damaged ceiling tile. We're down to like
about 500 under that. So less than 5% of the original punch list, which is a long journey to that point. So
it's a lot of stuff.
Probably the two most visual things were the large amount of time it took to finish the roof at the high school. That was all related to a subcontractor going out of business and some legal wranglings to sort out what was owned in that contract through the general contractor. That is now done, John?
Yeah, so they're getting their warranty inspection here within the next week, and then we'll get that piece of the puzzle behind us. And that was one of the last big contract items left on this project. The other thing was some work in the auditorium, which we've been working through as sort of time allows. You know, they have shows and practices and class fairly regularly. So when we can get in there, we're trying to finish up those last few items.
That's probably the most visible thing left is just buttoning up the finishes in the auditorium and to coordinate some code issues to get the orchestra pit cleared for occupancy.
Outside the building, one big site item is the corner of Plaza and Westerly, adjacent to the north parking lot, that big mud pit that's there. So that's where all the construction water drained to, and that's actually where pretty much all of the water that lands on the roofs or the parking lots on the campus goes there. We had to wait till the grass grew, and now we have to wait till it dries out and for the season to be right. Hawbaker will come back, clear that out and put like a soil media in there that's drainable. That'll help like it's part of the stormwater management system for all the impervious areas you have on campus. So that's a seasonal piece of work that couldn't happen through the fall with the wet weather, and then we went into winter. And so that's what, we have a couple $100,000 there being held for Hawbaker to complete that work, and then also the appropriate level of retainage to kind of act as your contractual carrots and make sure they come back.
So will all those panels be taken out of there?
Yeah, it'll look like a mowed field.
Oh, wonderful.
It'll be grass that the district will mow, and similar to Welsh Fields.
Great.
Actually functions just similarly like that.
Nice.
So.
Finally, just looking at this in a little different way, in terms of change order contingencies. I spoke with, I remember Facilities and Grounds, I don't think the full board, back in September, and I thought we were going to be pretty close to breaking even on change order contingencies, maybe cumulatively save a couple $100,000. We've done significantly better down the home stretch in negotiating and verifying actual values on change orders, and the team's done a really great job to bring this to, I think we're in a really good place for our change order contingencies. So you'll see on the far left-hand corner of the slide, our original change order contingency and our approved change orders, bringing us to where our current contingency is right now. So we have about $1.3 million in contingency that we're holding. When you look at what's left in terms of pending and exposure, worst case scenario, we're at $1,084,000 if everything goes against us. So I think I know we're somewhere between $1 million and $1.3 million that we'll be holding at the end of all of this in terms of unspent change order contingency. So there's our update. Any questions? We'd certainly be glad to, got the whole crew here. We should be able to answer anything.
I think the accuracy with which we're bringing in these projects really speaks well to the work of the whole team. Right. So thank you very much. Your thoroughness and detail-orientedness. Scott?
Question for Tim, I guess primarily, aside from whether you're getting any sleep. The punch list, you mentioned 8,000. I didn't know whether that was a real number or just a thrown out number, but this was obviously a very large project.
Yeah.
Okay. In your experience, is an 8,000 long punch list standard for a project of this magnitude? It seems like a lot, but yet there was obviously a lot of work done. So.
Yeah, I mean, the volume of dollars on this job and the volume of the square footage. I mean, we had close to 700,000 square feet on this campus. I mean, that's pretty appropriate.
Okay.
Yeah.
Cool. Thanks.
Part of what played into that too is when we did the punch list, because the building was so big, in order to actually get through the entire building to punch it out, we had to do it slightly earlier than you would typically do it.
Mhm.
So
Yeah.
it led to a couple more items on the list, and things got done right after the list was made.
Yeah, so some of those items might be, you might go into a classroom and there's a missing plate on the wall for like the data jack. The contractor just hadn't got there, but it's the team's job to document that, because you just want to go through that one time to make sure you get everything. So that the timing of it, in a perfect world, you finish and you have the contractors can go through and do their effort, and then you have a week to do the punch list, and then school starts. Well, most likely, we didn't have that time. So we were doing the punch list while school's happening in some cases, so.
Well, and I would think that even the phased nature and the phased occupancy probably adds to the punch list. It can't do anything
Yeah.
more than.
And it complicates it, because now we have contractors in the building going through, fixing up little touch-up marks on the wall when kids are in the building doing damage. So it's that balance of, that's why contractors have they really want to get in and get out on their punches, because they know as soon as the owners have their hands on the building, things start to get pretty gray as to, did the contractors damage the ceiling tile, or was it a kid throwing some at it? So that's another challenge here.
So the reason I asked those questions was earlier we had a contract extension conversation, and I think that my sense is that this punch list conversation is really a primary or a key driver to how the contract and the construction period has, drug out because of how everything came together and gets finished up. So that's my assumption.
There was you hit it on the mark. There's a direct corollary. Normally when it's new construction, if you walk into a space and there's 25 items in a room, you tell the contractor the room's not ready, here's our concerns, and get back to us when you're ready. And you're only supposed to do a punch list once for a room. But there were times that we went into areas, more times than easily 3 to 5 times. But you had to do that, because if we don't do it on a phased building, what Tim just said will happen. The contractor will say, well, we didn't make those dings, it's not our responsibility. So we were sort of up against that wire, correct?
Yeah, I think to echo that a little bit on, you mentioned earlier tonight, substantial completion. So substantial completion is defined as the owner's ability to utilize the building for its intended use. So we had, for the main portions of the building, we issued, it was like August 16th or something, we issued substantial completion letters with Crabtree for the building, less the auditorium, less the North LGI room, and then like the little cafe. So those spaces, as we all know, came on later. So in terms of the project kind of dragging out, that's a kind of a more contractual direct example of where they got a revised substantial completion letter and whatnot. But I mean, overall, like to be here for 4 or 5 years and to have a project with this complex phasing, to generally be able to move everybody in on time into the areas and make adjustments to that phasing as we needed to. I mean, I think certainly for our company, this is a very successful project, and very unique. So we feel good about where we're at. With closeout is always tough. There's always odds and ends, but we're trying to be very persistent for you guys, and not let things go just to make the paperwork disappear so we can all leave. We want to make sure that you guys are really getting what you're owed. So that's why we're still here.
Question?
Thank you for your persistence. I think, when we return rental cars, the rental car company says, if you don't document that it's our fault, then it's, so I would think that if they think they've completed it, take a picture and show it to us. But I did have a question, and since this is very number heavy, and it sort of ties into, well, there are two things. When I look at the Crabtree site and they list the cost of a building, and it goes back to what is considered the cost, because there are costs beyond just the contract costs. So the high school is listed at the site as being I wrote it down. It's about 2 million less than the contract cost on here, which given how big it is, isn't very much. But what do you look at when you say this is what this building costs?
I think it was, you directed it at Jeff, right?
Yeah.
Well, yeah, and again, and then others are much closer, you know, the Pearl Street is listed as 14.5 and it's 14.578, which is pretty close. So I'm just curious what it is that when you put on the site, this is what the school costs. What your
As far as
is it just the construction, the adding up those
I think it's, I mean, we're tracking both the construction and the soft cost for the
Okay.
total project cost for the owner, because you are typically, you know, if you're trying to compare apples to apples, the state will look at what are the true construction costs, so the actual bricks and mortar for the building. But then you as an owner are always looking at those because soft costs can be 20% of the project. So I think we're always tracking both with you throughout construction, because that contingency, as we spoke about, was part of the soft cost. It was not part of the building cost specifically. So obviously, all of us tracking that through the 4+ year, actually, I guess almost 5 years with Summer Project 2015, that has a large impact for the volume of work that you completed as a district.
in terms of when we say this is a X amount cost project?
Yes,
that
most
includes the both
definitely.
parts.
Yes,
And then
and
the other thing, which maybe is more Ed than you, is just asking, and it may not be for now, but at some point, there's the, I was looking back at the Act 34 hearings and the construction costs on that, and I know in 2 of the buildings, it was different, the elementary buildings, because there was both new and reno. But will you get back to us with that as well?
I hadn't planned on it.
I assume that we're okay on it.
Yes, we haven't exceeded any Act 34 thresholds.
No, we're not even
So-
close to those.
Okay.
Yeah, so, yes.
Yeah, I'm sorry I didn't send that in earlier. Thanks.
Was that it? Yeah. Jim?
A question. In previous updates, you gave us an update about the safety records, which were fairly remarkable, and I didn't see that in this particular one. I'm assuming because most of the people are off-site.
Right.
Except for the people closing it out.
Right, so we stopped tracking,
We're up to 200+ days, sort of as we hit substantial completion, and then they
I
sort of move people
don't think
off-site.
there've been any accidents lately, and we're not tracking days without, because there's some days that there's no work going on.
Yeah.
And then other days, like today, where there's a lot of work going on. So we haven't kept that metric going past September.
That's fine. I mean, I think it's a real testament to the construction management and the way we coordinated it with our folks. I mean, those records were outstanding. So, congratulations.
Thanks. Yeah, I mean, that's obviously very much a team effort. And when we look at it too, it's also the interactions with the school on all these projects, such close proximity and very complex phasing. So we think that was a success here on this project as well.
Dan?
So I want to acknowledge one thing I learned about the process by following the development of the various change order reports and so on. And one of the things that Ed made us aware of was how much collaboration and teamwork it takes to create those in the process of coming to us with those requests. And you have to have, when you're doing that, you've got to be thinking, and from the way Ed talked about it as well, you're thinking about, is this really needed? And at what level do we need to go to the board and ask for these kinds of change orders in relation to the general progress of the project? I just want to just acknowledge that effort that went into this, because, I mean, frankly, you came in under budget with this, and I think it took a lot of diligence on your part to do that. So I just want to acknowledge what appears to be the outcome of some good work. Thank you.
Any other questions? Thank you very much.
Thank you for your time.
You done with us now?
You guys are all, get out of here.
Don't come back.
Good night to your iPhone. Weather's not bad.
Yeah, well, we really appreciate all of your work over these years.
Thanks,
We're
guys.
still involved with Memorial Fields.
That's right. Yeah. So moving on to item C, under Facilities and Grounds, we'll be looking at the high school campus accessibility plan.
So we had talked about this in a previous Facilities and Grounds Committee meeting. I've taken some of our site plan, we presented a site plan. I've tried to do my best to chop the site plan up a little bit and intersperse some photographs to help with your understanding. There's no new information here, just a different way to look at it, I suppose, would be the best way to put it. So this was a site plan many of you have seen before. The red paths are the paths that are currently accessible. The numbered circles are areas of proposed work, and the purple paths will be accessible when the proposed work is complete. Now, I understand this projected slide is probably going to be very difficult to read, so what we're going to do is drill down and talk in general about where some of these areas are and help you get the feel of what we're doing. I've used an aerial photograph, again, to help you understand exactly what we're talking about. And we will start with looking at the north side of the street. So plan view, the area I'm going to be talking about is circled by green. It's going from the student parking lot over to the entrance of the Delta building / north building. So in plan view, you can see it to the left, and then to the right is an aerial view, basically encircling the same area. So basically what we're talking about is if someone were moving directly from that large parking lot towards the north building, what they would do is they would be encountering the current accessible path would be to leave this parking lot to move up this way and across the front of the building or this way. But what that does is it gets you to a point where you appear to have a straight path to the building and it doesn't exist. So basically, picture you're standing right here looking in this direction. What you'd be looking at is standing on this sidewalk, looking at what appears to be your path across to the door, but you have a curb here, curb here, curb here. So continuing, getting a little closer look, curb there, curb there, curb there. So what we're proposing to do in the work is to take out those curbs to cut that straight path from the parking lot through. And it also aids in accessibility. If you get into this lot, you immediately can jump onto an accessible path, as opposed to moving up to the accessible path, which is at the far end of the parking lot. Coming across the street here to the area between Welch Pool and the Westerly Parkway entrance of the building. Again, we're looking at two curb cuts here, and what this does is currently, if you cross the street, hit an accessible path here, the intent is for you to cross the street here, to come across the street here, and to come up this way. But if you happen to cross the street this way and start up this, there's a curb cut here, you can start up this path and get to this point and basically be stranded and have to turn around and go back down, have to go back down the path to cross here to get over there. So we're recommending these two paths so that you can jump right across the street and get to there. So visually, make sure I'm going the right way. Okay, so visually, there's the pool here. You're coming up this path, and you get to here, and you got curb there, curb there. You have to go back down this path to the light, cross, and then come back up. And again, This is just a little bit closer view of that crossing path we want to create in that location. Moving around to the bus side of the building, we have several locations we're going to look at here, the first of which is to get to the track. This is probably one of the most egregious pieces, probably the highest priority, in that if you can follow the red, there's really no great access between the building and the track. The way the site was designed was there's handicap parking at the track, which is easily accessible to the track, and handicap parking at the building, which is easily accessible to the building. But if you're in the building and don't have a vehicle, you have a pretty circuitous path to get around, work your way through the lot, and make your way over to the track. So what we're looking at here is picking up 3 curb cuts to get you from this accessible path directly across to the track. And this is showing you that aerial view, which is the direct line passing. So that direct line is right here. You don't have it now, it doesn't exist now. There's a curb here, curb there, curb there. You have to go out and around to the far end of the parking lot to get across. This is just a little closer view. We're going to take these curbs out, so when you're standing at the building, my back's to the building when I took this picture, a straight shot across to the track. Very similar issue at the
Excuse me, Ed, right
Yes.
behind you, just to orient me, when you're standing with your back to the building there,
Mhm.
is the exit from the gym pretty near where,
Yes,
that's pretty
it's
much where you are?
pretty much
Okay,
exactly, yes.
Thanks.
It's hard to tell from the scale on the pictures, but on the pictures with the curb cuts going into the gym, that much narrower path. For this much wider path, will the curb cuts be wider? Will they basically go the entire distance for the most part, or will they still be kind of that standard,
I think
whatever,
we're,
maybe 4-foot curb cut?
yeah, I think we're looking at, unless there's some other compelling reason, that might be site or grading related, we would be looking at a standard width curb cut. However, these are not construction documents, these are concepts, so that is.
My only comment on that, would, as it relates to this specific
That one?
pathway, is that looks to be designed as a pretty
Sure.
high-density
Mhm.
pathway. So if there was any area that would have a wider curb cut, this is where I would do it. I don't think it needs to be
Understand.
done
Sure.
in the other areas on the, on that parking lot, but
Mhm.
this is one of the major,
Yep.
designed to be one of the major arteries, so that would be the only comment I would have there.
Because if you're crossing in a crowd.
Understand that feedback, so I will look closer at that. Very similar situation, but except we're looking at now accessing the tennis courts. And this goes back to, again, the much narrower walks, but again, you don't have that direct, you have the path to get you across the first bus loop, which is intended to get you to the parking spaces, but then you lose your path here to finish out to the courts. So what you have here, again, these are the narrower sidewalks. You hit that first curb cut to get you to the parking. This first curb cut gets you over to the parking, but this is regular curb, regular curb, regular curb. So we're gonna cut them out to get you across to the tennis courts. And then down towards the lower end of the parking lot, we have a path, and I'll just tell you an anecdotal story. When I met with the user groups, there was some frustration, and they described it, the individual described it as who is accessibly in a wheelchair, playing a game of Frogger. If you remember the old game of Frogger, we'd start jumping across the road and have to turn around and jump back. And when trying to navigate a site, the worst thing for him would be to go down a path and think he's going where he needs to go, and there's no place to move, and he's got to go the whole way back up to find another path to start down. And this was one of those areas that really fit that description really well. And this is at the lower end of this lot, where you have this accessible path leading down along, and this is intended to access all of the buses. But if you're moving down this path and have intentions to get over into the parking lot, there's nowhere to get there. It's all solid curb the whole way down. And you get down to the end, and you're kind of stuck heading back up. So what we're looking at there, this is that path coming down. You know, it's all solid curb. You get down to the bottom down here, and there's no outlet to get you over to the parking lot. So we'd be looking at here, cutting here, and cutting here to get you over to the parking lot, and down here, cutting here, and cutting here to get you over to the parking lot. So you don't have that dead end at the end of that long path.
Ed, at the other end of this, is there a curb cut, like where that white car is? Like,
So we'd be adding there as well.
okay.
We're adding, let me go back. I apologize here, I'm jumping ahead instead of back. So we're cutting here and over there.
Okay.
So it gets you
So you can
all
get
the ones.
all the way down
Yeah.
onto the asphalt then, yeah.
I think one's cut off of this particular drawing, but we're getting you all of the cuts down at that end.
Great.
Okay, and then two that, going the wrong way again, I apologize. Two that are not campus mobility, but rather building egress. These are areas, this part of the building tails off pretty drastically towards O'Brien, and because of the challenges in this area, there's limited accessible paths. And what we've created in this part of the building are what we call areas of rescue, where if a handicapped person would exit the building, they would push a button to basically alert emergency responders that they need rescued. We've, in talking with those people and trying to help ease some of the concerns of that type of a situation, we're looking at potentially creating two ways to get out of the building, to at least get away from the building, if not able to access the campus, at least away from the building in an emergency situation. And this is down at the back side of the auditorium. This is down at the back side of the old auditorium. This is the back side of the new auditorium. This is the back side of the old auditorium. So the first of those is at the old auditorium. You're basically down at one end of the building. If there's an emergency, it's really tough to get back through the building because of lifts and other devices to move you back up through, and then you come out and it's curbing. So we're looking at offering some at least a curb cut here, so that you can get down off of the curb and get away from the building. There's not a good way to access much of the site, but at least you can get away from the building.
Yeah, I thought it was odd that there was a ramp there that was a dead end then.
Yeah,
'Cause it's-
and that's just because they're steep slopes. And the railings are there, and it's the reason that it's not part of the ADA planned access is because the slopes are so steep. But at least we're giving a courtesy ramp that you can get away from the building if there's an emergency outside of the building. And then up at the upper side, this is the auditorium loading dock. And we're going to try to figure out the best way to get people off of this dock. There's a sidewalk over here. One potential way would be to just try to keep my pointer straight, but there's a sidewalk off of this door. You could potentially come around and meet the dock over there, and there's a few steps over here. I'm thinking this side's going to be a little bit easier to achieve, but we're studying both sides right now. So this is the overall plan again. You've already seen this on my summer projects list. You asked for a little bit more detailed update, which I'm giving you now. This plan in schematic sense is showing 24 curb cuts and 2 ramps. We're projecting an initial cost estimate at $223,000, and I have allocated in my budget $250,000 as a line item. So any additional feedback or questions, but we're planning on moving forward with construction documents on this based on this review and any further direction.
Dan?
First, Ed, I want to thank you for engaging those impacted by these barriers in the conversation. That was something, we talked about this maybe a year or longer ago. That was one of the things I had hoped for. And for me anyway, individually, I appreciate your recognition that the people who live in that world could give voice to these kinds of challenges, and you've done a very effective job at doing that. And just to clarify, when you talk about a curb cut, you're talking about, yeah, we're going to remove the concrete barrier, if you will, but we're also going to have that plate above, which provides traction for those who happen to be.
Provides traction as well as for visually impaired. It gives the
tactical feedback about where they are.
Yes.
That's great. And there's discussion in the materials about a working group that you've, within the school. I don't need names, but who's represented on that group, just out of curiosity, in terms of the people with whom you're working going forward?
So Will's helped me with that group. We have students, teachers, our director of diversity, Dr. Stout, Curtis Johnson, special ed representative Sharon Salter.
I think
yeah.
that's, I was just, and so when you talked about individual, and students are, among others, are real valuable voices in this. And this comes, I guess, the timing of this presentation immediately following the discussion about change orders in relation to the limits within your budget for this kind of work. In a sense, when I think about this kind of circumstance, a number of times when we've talked about change orders, it'll often be followed by the phrase, this is an unanticipated condition, or the drawings didn't match the reality of when we got into this situation. And I feel like, and this is a good instance of it, that here's an instance where the drawings or whatever had originally been planned doesn't fit the reality of the circumstance in which we find ourselves. So I don't know how this is going to shake out. I mean, this is really a financial question, but I'm sure there are additional needs and priorities which are mentioned which need to be addressed. And to the extent that we fortunately have a bit of we're in the black a little bit in terms of the contingency budget, there might be some argument that could be made that we can use that to address these needs that hadn't previously been fully understood. So, and I'm just trying to put two and two together here, Randy.
We'll bring Mr. Brown to the table.
So, I mean, the projects need to close out at some point in time.
Sure.
Yep.
Sure.
And and Ed has given you a lot of very good information.
Right.
There's still some additional final accounting that we're working on in the finance part of the house. We haven't talked about soft costs yet.
Right.
Or we haven't completely talked about soft costs. So let's not get excited that there is millions of dollars still left to spend.
Right.
Just yet.
Only 1 million. Anyway.
But
only.
I worked with Ed to understand, how we wanted to handle this project.
Right.
And he's already shared that he will take that, instead of keeping the project open, because we'll know this will continue into the summer, we'll close out the project. If there is any residual funds, then we will allocate those to other projects that we have within the district. This will come out of his 5-year capital fund. There are other items. They may not be access related that have come to our attention, and we're working on several of those others, especially in the short term versus the long term. But we'll handle those depending on their timing, but probably we'll handle those more through his 5-year capital funds.
Well, the one thing that's brought to my attention, in addition to the curb cuts, have been the door switches for people with physical disabilities. The opportunity they have to be more independent by simply walking up to a door, hitting the switch, and having the door open rather than having somebody open the door for them when they're in a wheelchair. That is right behind the curb cuts, in my view. And I don't live in that world the way these people do, these young people do. But I'd advocate for looking at those priorities.
Well, that's what they're going to get to. I mean, this proposal was with the timing that we have.
Right.
That's not what we're bringing tonight.
Right, I understand.
They will get to that. The committee's not finished working on it.
That's great. Thank you.
Yeah, and the elevator access.
Yeah, that's it.
issues are another.
That's right.
Okay. All right.
Thank you.
Any other questions on this plan?
So just a couple quick statements or comments from what I had mentioned at the facilities meeting as well. I'm glad to see that there, and Ed, I had asked this question and relative to the curb cuts going into the gymnasium area, because that appeared to be, if there was anything on here, and again, I'm just using a word, that appeared to be more of a convenience consideration, those were the ones that to me looked, not that they weren't necessary, but they were more of a convenience. And you had stated that the cost on those was nominal relative to the rest of them. So I just wanted to state that. And that's it. I just think it's very interesting how, after all is said and done, the preponderance of this is on the upper parking lot, area, which is kind of where the conversation started when we were walking that. So, and I definitely am in support. I know it came up in conversation relative to the areas of refuge and providing egress there, and that being an add-on kind of a thing. I'm definitely in support of that. So, nice job.
Other questions or comments? No. Anything else? So that committee is going to continue to be working, is essentially the takeaway, is that we knew that wasn't limited just to the curb cuts, but that was a priority for this summer's projects. Yeah.
Is there what's the next board action relative to this?
So my intent would be to take this out to the bid phase and be back with bids. That would be my typical process in that 5-year capital plan. We don't go through the schematic, design development phases unless it's a special request from the board. So the next time you would see this would be with bids.
Great.
And that may be another reason to keep this as part of that process versus some other capital process, is the expediency of moving it through.
Great. Other questions? Okay. All right. Thank you. So
Thanks,
then, the next item is also still under facilities and grounds, the CRPR comprehensive plan, and our district's response to the plan that they had submitted.
So what you have before you tonight is comments that were reviewed at Facilities and Grounds last week, and then there were some additions or modifications based upon administrative review, especially from our focus on operations. So this is kind of a second review for some of you since it's been through committee, open for comments. The goal is, as Ms. Brandt mentioned previously, to have the district prepare a response and add comments that can be part of the matter of record for the comprehensive plan. If there's any comments or questions, be happy to receive those, and then the goal would be that this would go to you as an action item on March 2nd so that it can be submitted to CRPR.
Can I just add one thing? So the COG General Forum will vote to accept the comp study on their March 23rd meeting. And so any final edits we have before we vote on this we would want those before that date.
Comments? The one thing that I was potentially interested in, if others were, was to add a note of our support for pursuing a feasibility study on an indoor recreation center. Because I think that's going to potentially really benefit the kids in our district, all of our stakeholders. And it's at this point, it's a feasibility study, not a commitment to a project. So, and that was one of the main, really significant recommendations of the comprehensive plan. So.
Yeah, I think especially related to the comments in the study pertaining to the school district with the urgent and unmet need of indoor facilities for space for especially winter. And so that feasibility study is going to be, I think, key for the future of the relationship between CRPR and SCASD and facility usage. So I support that adding that comment.
Anyone else?
because I think, you know, clearly that could be, you know, it's going to help free up, you know, venues that, you know, for the whole community's usage if it's able to be successful. So, yeah. And at this point, I mean, it's support for a feasibility study.
Right.
So,
Right.
yeah. Yeah. Okay. And
I'd be
no
willing.
objections?
I think that makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
Thanks for thinking about it.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely.
And since it was one of the most significant components of the,
Mm-hmm.
in terms of a major potential capital project down the road for the community.
And even years ago, I was surprised that we didn't have that in this community.
Yeah. Well, I think because
But
Penn
that's
State
'cause I've
used to
been-
allow people to use their facilities, right?
That helped. But even so, anyone who's spent any time out west, communities have that routinely. And it really adds to quality of life.
It does, and actually, in the comp study, the consultants looked at, I think, 14 other like districts, or not just, I'm sorry, communities, and all of them, besides ours, have an indoor rec center. Most of them have an indoor aquatic center. So we're really the only community that they could find that does not have one.
Yeah,
Public. We don't have a public one.
That really has impacted our relationship and some of the challenges when we make changes in planning for our programs. It has a negative impact on Parks and Rec programs, whether they're kid programs or adult programs. They get shifted or bumped. Yeah, our programs have priority. So, and then I think, obviously, there's a strong relationship over the use of our pool and what's the long-term plan for our aquatics in our community. You know, does the state high pool, being a 25-meter pool, become, is that the long-term solution, or is Parks and Rec going to consider a solution that we could potentially access if it is a solution the swim community gets behind and the overall community? So I think the feasibility support makes a lot of sense, and if I think as Gretchen with having a board member voice liaison, you know, having an understanding of where they are in the process, what's the time frame of what comes out of it, and that'll be a big help.
And I think that those comments in relation to Amber's comments should both be included in our comments that we submit.
Aquatic center.
That not only do we support the feasibility study for the indoor rec center, but also within that indoor rec center an aquatic center.
Yeah.
Because of the direct relationship with SCASD and the pool usage by CRPR and that high need.
And we have an aging facility in terms of our pool.
And we may want to mention that in our comments, because I think, that, as Randy said, these will be part of the matter of record. And so that can be cited that in the future, and it's an obvious need.
I don't know if there's any way to quantify sort of lifespan concerns related to our pool, but if they're like pursuing a feasibility study related to an aquatic center, the time span, you know, can be pretty lengthy in order to actually get something running. And so how does that line up with major potential renovations that might need to be done to our pool?
And I believe Mr. Poprick had that in a memo from the last facilities meeting that
Right.
we could just include the lifespan of that pool in our comments.
All right. Anything else on this? Okay. All right. Thank you. Thank you, Gretchen, for all your
Thanks,
work on
guys.
that.
Thank you, Randy.
2 years of work.
Thanks. Randy and Jim.
Okay, so the next item is also
Oh, sorry.
under.
You're on the other one, sorry.
I'm sorry.
I was just confusing Jim with another project. Sorry.
Oh, okay. Fiscal stewardship, the SPPA cost-sharing agreement for energy consultant procurement.
This one.
Right, so this document, again, was reviewed in committee, it's been reviewed here multiple times. We brought in some additional language, as we've talked about, related to, primarily related to the COG participation and the limitations they live under with federal funding. All of the comments are very supportive for us in that we will have be the lead organization, which we had somewhat agreed to in the past anyways. We're looking at a 24-month time frame, which has been suggested by much of the leadership and membership, that should be an opportunity for that provide to entering into this agreement. Talks about legal fees in addition to the energy consultant fees and any other litigation costs. I think that is just about everything that has been added and modified since you've last seen it.
And this will be a future action item.
This will also be a future action item, probably on May 2nd.
May 2nd?
March 2nd.
March, I did that the last
Sorry.
time. Sorry.
It's almost 10.
Yeah,
Ready for the school
it
year to
is.
be over.
Okay. All right. Any questions?
No.
All right. Thank you. Okay, so moving on to committee reports.
Thanks,
Let's
Randy.
just try to keep these like super brief, like two bullet points, since it's already almost 10 o'clock, and we do need to have exec session after this, so we should be very concise. Okay, so Facilities and Grounds Committee.
I think, excuse
We
me, I think we
covered it.
covered
Yeah,
everything
I
throughout the
think so, too.
meeting, so no need to recap.
Yep. Finance.
We actually had a really full agenda,
Mhm.
but I will leave it to folks to review the agenda in the spirit of brevity.
Mhm.
If anybody has any questions, just contact me. We did go over several items on budget development.
Yeah.
Related to food service, charter school, and PSERS. That will be, PSERS specifically will be coming up
Mhm.
again. So
Yep.
I'll leave it at that.
As part of our process here. So upcoming committee meetings are listed here. Policy Development Committee is the next one on the 18th. And then moving on to Central Intermediate Unit.
There was no meeting in December.
Okay, and-
So then our next meeting is next Thursday.
Okay. And NSBA, PSBA?
Lori mentioned Advocacy Day, which is March 23rd, but later in that week is the sectional meetings, which will be held on that Thursday, the 26th, will be held here.
Okay. We should make sure that we stay on top of that. Yep. SCASD Ed Foundation report.
Meeting on Wednesday.
Okay, great. And then are there any CAC reports from recent CAC
We
meetings?
had a CAC for facilities on Thursday, and Ed basically presented the information that you saw regarding accessibility, and the members there were very supportive of the efforts in curb cuts plan.
Great, thank you.
Could I just say something about communications is?
Sure thing, yeah.
So you should have all received a copy of the annual report
Mhm.
and instructions where if you want any revisions or whatever on that, to get them to Chris Rosenblum. So just a reminder, because
Mhm.
that probably won't come up before our next communications
I
meeting.
think they want it by the 21st, so I turned mine in. So, thanks. Okay. Any other CAC reports? Okay. And then just a reminder that this Wednesday is our board coffee at SCLO Library over at the lunch hour. And then looking forward at future agenda planning, we have meetings on the 2nd and the 16th next month. You can see the items there. And with that, I'd like a motion to,
I'm
oh, sorry, yep.
I know it's getting late, but I wanted to bring something up for future agenda planning. I
Sure thing.
sent an email
Mhm.
related to policy. So if there's a better way to go through this, just tell
Mhm.
me, again, in the interest of brevity. But I would like to request that the board make a review of the homework policy for the district, obviously in conjunction with the administration, a priority. And the reason this is kind of coming up is with all the class scheduling and things like that I'm getting from my kids and hearing from their friends and things like that. And one of the major comments that they make is, first question asked, what's homework like in that class? What's homework like in this class? And our policy states that homework is supposed to be consistent, but that is not, it doesn't appear to be occurring, at least from the kid's side. So again, I don't know whether this is a board conversation, administrative conversation, whatever, but I'm bringing it up as a future item so that it gets somewhere. And maybe it's just a discussion that everything's fine and, it's a communication consideration versus a change, but I'm just bringing.
So potentially a policy committee discussion.
Well, I actually think
we had talked about before.
It's a administrative regulation issue, but I think if somebody has a concern with homework, they need to chat with the teacher and the principal. But I mean, if we want to say there's a specific time parameter on homework, at the secondary level, there is more of a correlation to learning with homework than the elementary. So if we're going to put a cap on that, then are we going to get into waiting classes too? I mean, where's this going to go is the question from a policy lens.
That's why I'm just raising the question. I don't have an answer, solution, or anything. I'm just raising the question as to whether that's something that
Bob,
could be
didn't you
addressed.
mention, though, that Dr. Stout was tackling a
We-
little bit of
we
some
do need
regulations for
to
middle level,
produce
which
the-
was one of the areas we had discussed before, maybe needed some, something addressed, or some
We
articulation?
do have procedures, but we do need to produce an administrative guideline for the policy, for the homework policy. That was where we left it, and Will's been working. At the middle level, the high school does have it fleshed out in their handbook. We haven't typed and added it to your policy or attached it to your policy.
I would just say from a student perspective, I think it would be really helpful to do a sort of overview, just because as a student who has been in multiple levels of classes, there are some classes in which homework is so much that it is really to the detriment of a student's mental health. And then there's classes on the flip side that have so little homework that it really creates a sort of class-wide sentiment that it's a course that matters less, or a course that isn't as important or valued among the community. And that, I think, is something that is pretty common across the high school, and something that really really contributes to our environment and to our sort of assumption of each other's intelligence levels and sort of social standing. That really homework level across classes is something that really contributes widely, I would say, to a lot of hierarchy and structure within our high school especially. So that could be something that just could use, I think, a wider.
So I have another item for the board work session with student government. I met with Iris, and Joy had to do a retake, but Isabel wasn't part of that, but that's, I'm sure Iris would ditto that. But I mean, having a conversation, around- so how does that interface with the classroom, running a classroom, the curriculum, if it's coming from the college board? And so I think we have a good item for a work session. That might fill the work session and supplant some of the other items we discussed, but I will be running those items by board leadership, but I owe Joy and Iris a follow-up email from my meeting the other day with Iris with items.
If you want a group of folks together to talk about that, that would be great, and probably as long as we know beforehand, then we can be really intentional about getting a diverse group of students and a diverse sort of.
Very
range
good
of classes.
point.
But
That's
I
great.
will say that Leadership Council is almost entirely students taking like the same 6 classes,
Right.
and we all see each other every day.
Right.
So it would be, I think, to really have an effective conversation about this, we'll really want to be intentional about who is there, and we're gonna need to make sure it's students who we're not always hearing from.
That'd be great.
Yeah.
That's a
I
great
think a
idea.
lot of teacher voice needs to be any type of, if we're going to put a constraint on faculty regarding homework or what we're doing outside of class, then we better make sure there's a long, in-depth process with their voice as well.
And from a board level, when we think about policy, it's, when we're talking about something like homework, it's probably more articulating a philosophy rather than very specific regulations that would, things like that are more.
And evidence base, what's really required in terms of supporting daytime learning or learning within a program that derives from homework as opposed to day-to-day instructional experience? So what's the evidence base for that in terms of its benefit?
And it's going to vary very much from class to class.
It is.
We have classes that really,
Right.
you know,
And age to age.
need to be in the classroom to get the work done, so
Right.
it really depends.
So many of
Yeah.
our students in extracurriculars, that I think contributes a lot to it, because we have folks who are not getting home until 9 p.m. And then if you have 4 hours of homework, or if you have no homework, it really just varies widely from person to person.
Yeah.
And the mental health piece, which I'm so glad you brought up, Isabel. Thank you for bringing that up.
Okay. All right, so it sounds like we'll confer on the right approach to, yeah.
Yep.
Okay, sounds good. So then, anything else for future agenda planning?
So with that, I'll be looking for a motion to adjourn to executive session.
So moved.
Okay, that's been moved in second. All in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Anyone opposed? Okay. All right, we are adjourned then.